Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Foundation. Victor Romero had built his life like he built his construction empire, methodically, deliberately, and with an iron will that bent for no one. At 42, he commanded respect in Denver's development circles, not through inherited wealth or political connections, but through sheer determination and an unforgiving work ethic that had dragged him from the trailer parks of his youth to the penthouse he now called home. His wife Tessa had been the crown jewel of his achievements, or so he'd believed. They met 12 years ago when she was a struggling real estate agent, and he was just beginning to make his mark. She was beautiful in that effortless way that turned heads. Auburn hair that caught sunlight like fire, green eyes that could melt steel, and a laugh that had convinced him she was worth breaking his own rules about mixing business with pleasure. "You're too serious, Victor," she told him on their third date, her fingers tracing the scar on his knuckles, a reminder of the fights he'd won growing up poor and angry. Life's supposed to be fun. He'd married her because she represented everything his brutal childhood had lacked: warmth, beauty, and the promise of a family that wouldn't be torn apart by addiction and violence. Their daughter Emma, now 6, had seemed like proof that he'd finally built something that couldn't be destroyed. But Victor had learned early that trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. His father had taught him that lesson with his fists, and the streets had reinforced it with blood and betrayal. The only reason he'd let his guard down with Tessa was that she'd seemed genuinely grateful for the life he'd given her. The house in Cherry Hills Village, the luxury cars, the country club membership that had required him to swallow his pride and pretend he belonged among people who'd inherited what he'd fought to earn. Jake Morrison had been Tessa's older brother, the golden boy who'd coasted through life on charm and his family's connections. Where Victor had clawed his way up from nothing, Jake had floated from one failed venture to another, always landing softly thanks to family money and his ability to make people like him. Victor had hired him as a favor to Tessa, giving him a position in the company's marketing department that required minimal effort and maximum visibility. The irony wasn't lost on Victor that Jake's role involved selling the dream of perfect homes to families who'd never experienced the nightmare of what happens when those dreams crumble. This particular Thursday had started like any other. Victor had been driving back from site inspection in Boulder, his mind occupied with cost overruns and permit delays, when his phone rang. Emma's voice, small and frightened, cut through his concentration like a blade. "Daddy, I need help." The words sent ice through his veins. Emma was mature for her age, had to be with Tessa's increasing tendency to treat motherhood like an inconvenient hobby, but there was something in her tone that triggered every protective instinct he'd developed. "Isn't your mother around?" he asked, already pressing harder on the accelerator. "Mom is upstairs with Uncle Jake. I'm in the basement." The phone nearly slipped from Victor's hands. Jake was supposed to be in Chicago for a trade show. He'd signed off on the travel expenses himself just 3 days ago, and Tessa had mentioned having lunch with her book club today, had even asked him to pick up Emma from school because she'd be running late. But book club met on Tuesdays. Victor's mind raced as he navigated through traffic with single-minded focus. There could be innocent explanations. Jake could have returned early. Tessa could have confused her schedule. But the careful way Emma had phrased her words, "Mom is upstairs with Uncle Jake," suggested she knew something was wrong even if she couldn't articulate what. By the time Victor pulled into his circular driveway, his hands were steady and his mind was clear. Whatever he was about to discover, he would handle it with the same calculated precision that had built his empire. He'd learned long ago that emotions were weapons that could be turned against you, but information was power that could never be taken away. The house was quiet when he entered through the front door, his footsteps muffled by the Persian rugs Tessa had insisted on despite their impracticality with a young child. He could hear faint sound from upstairs, voices, movement, something that made his jaw clench with controlled fury. He found Emma in the basement playroom, sitting on the floor with her coloring books spread around her like a defensive barrier. She looked up at him with eyes that held too much understanding for someone her age. "Daddy, they've been making weird noises upstairs for a long time," she said quietly. "And Uncle Jake's car is in the garage next to Mommy's." Victor knelt beside his daughter, studying her face for signs of trauma or confusion. What he saw instead was the sharp intelligence he'd hoped she'd inherited from him, combined with an intuitive understanding that her world was about to change. "How long have they been upstairs, sweetheart?" "Since before lunch. Uncle Jake came over and said he had a surprise for Mommy. They went upstairs and told me to play down here and not bother them." The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. Jake's car hidden in the garage. The careful instruction to keep Emma away. The timing that coincided with Victor's scheduled absence. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a recent development. This was planned, deliberate, and had probably been going on for months. Victor felt something cold and familiar settle in his chest. The same ruthless calm that had carried him through the worst moments of his life. He'd been betrayed before, by his father, by business partners, by friends who'd smiled to his face while plotting behind his back. But this was different. This wasn't just about money or pride. This was about the family he'd built, the trust he'd given, and the future he'd planned. And Victor Romero had never forgiven a betrayal in his life. Chapter 2. Gathering Storms. The next 3 weeks passed in a carefully orchestrated performance of normalcy. Victor continued his daily routines with mechanical precision while conducting the most important investigation of his life. He'd learned patience in the Army, before construction, during the years when one wrong move could mean the difference between survival and destruction. Now that patience served him as he documented every detail of his wife's affair. He hired a private investigator named Carl Hoffman, a former police detective who specialized in domestic cases. Victor chose him not for his discretion, though that was important, but for his reputation as someone who found evidence that would hold up in court. Victor had no intention of being blindsided by legal technicalities when the time came to act. "You want the full package?" Hoffman had asked during their first meeting in a downtown coffee shop. "Photos, timeline, financial records, communication logs?" "Everything," Victor had replied. "I want to know how long this has been going on, where they meet, who else knows about it, and what they've been saying about me behind my back." The investigation revealed a betrayal more comprehensive than Victor had imagined. Phone records showed daily calls between Tessa and Jake dating back 8 months. Credit card statements revealed hotel charges, restaurant visits, and shopping trips that coincided with Victor's business travel. Most damning of all were the text messages Hoffman recovered, filled with intimate details and cruel jokes about Victor's intensity and his trailer park paranoia. But it was the financial records that truly ignited Victor's fury. Tessa had been systematically moving money from their joint accounts into a personal savings account she'd opened without his knowledge. Not enough to trigger his attention individually, but over 8 months it totaled nearly $400,000. She was planning her exit strategy, and she was using his money to fund it. Jake, meanwhile, had been charging personal expenses to the company credit card and billing private clients through Victor's firm for work that had nothing to do with their projects. He'd stolen approximately $150,000 in combined theft and billing fraud, all while playing the role of grateful brother-in-law at family dinners. "They're planning to leave together," Hoffman reported during their final meeting. "Jake's been looking at properties in Austin, and your wife's been researching custody laws. They think they're being careful, but they're amateurs at this game." Victor studied the photographs spread across the table. Images of his wife and brother-in-law in intimate embraces, entering hotels, laughing together in restaurants he'd never been invited to join. In every photo, they looked happy in a way that made his chest tighten with something deeper than anger. "There's one more thing," Hoffman said, his expression carefully neutral. "Your daughter. They've been discussing what to do about her. From what I could piece together, Jake isn't interested in being a stepfather, and your wife seems willing to negotiate on custody if it means starting fresh." That was the moment Victor's last trace of humanity died. He'd been prepared for the affair, had even begun to accept the financial theft as the cost of learning what kind of person he'd married. But the idea that they were planning to abandon Emma, or worse, use her as a bargaining chip in their escape plan, crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. At home, Victor maintained his facade while watching Tessa with new eyes. She moved through their house like an actress playing a role, going through the motions of being a wife and mother while clearly planning her exit. She was better at deception than he'd given her credit for, but now that he knew what to look for, he could see the tells. The way she checked her phone constantly, the excuse-making for simple errands, the gradual emotional withdrawal that she disguised as stress from Emma's school activities. Jake continued showing up for family dinners and company meetings, playing the part of loyal brother-in-law and grateful employee. He'd even had the audacity to suggest Victor take a vacation, claiming he looked stressed and needed time away from work. "You should surprise Tessa with a weekend getaway," Jake had suggested over dinner. "I could watch Emma. Give you two some time to reconnect." Victor had smiled and thanked him for the suggestion, all while imagining how satisfying it would be to watch Jake's world collapse around him. The planning began in earnest once Victor had all the facts. He'd built his business by thinking several moves ahead of his competitors, by anticipating problems before they materialized and having solutions ready. Now he applied that same strategic thinking to the destruction of two people who had betrayed him at the deepest level. The key was patience and misdirection. If Victor moved too quickly or obviously, they might escape with minimal consequences. But if he was smart about it, if he played his cards carefully, he could ensure that they lost everything: their relationship, their freedom, their future, and any chance of finding happiness elsewhere. Victor's first move was to document everything legally. He met with his attorney, Elizabeth Valdez, a razor-sharp divorce lawyer who specialized in high-asset cases involving infidelity. She reviewed Hoffman's evidence with professional approval. "This is exceptionally solid," she said. "Colorado is a no-fault state, but adultery can still impact property division and custody arrangements, especially when there's evidence of financial misconduct. With this level of documentation, we can pursue full custody and minimal alimony." "That's just the beginning," Victor replied. "I want them to face criminal charges for the theft. I want Jake blacklisted from the industry. And I want Tessa to understand exactly what it means to cross someone like me." Elizabeth studied him carefully. "Victor, I understand you're angry, but we need to be smart about this. Don't do anything that could compromise the legal case or put you at risk." Victor nodded, but privately he was thinking far beyond legal consequences. Courts could award him custody and financial damages, but they couldn't restore the years of his life he'd wasted on two people who'd been planning to destroy him from the inside. For that kind of betrayal, the punishment needed to be more personal. The second phase of his plan involved financial preparation. Victor began moving assets into accounts and investments that Tessa couldn't access or claim. He restructured his business holdings, created trusts for Emma's future, and quietly liquidated joint assets that could be disputed in divorce proceedings. Every move was legal, carefully documented, and designed to ensure that when the time came, Tessa would walk away with as little as possible. But the third phase, the part that would satisfy the cold fury burning in his chest, required more creativity. Victor had always believed that the best revenge was living well, but sometimes living well meant ensuring that your enemies couldn't live well at all. Chapter 3. The Unforeseen Scene. The call came on a Thursday afternoon, exactly 3 weeks after Victor had begun documenting his wife's betrayal. He'd planned it that way, of course. Thursdays were when he typically conducted site visits, and Tessa had grown comfortable with the pattern. What she didn't know was that Victor had started returning home randomly, testing whether she'd maintain her schedule of afternoon rendezvous with his brother-in-law. "Daddy, I need help." Emma's voice carried that same frightened tone that had alerted him to the situation weeks earlier. "Isn't your mother around?" Victor asked, following the script they'd unconsciously established. "Mom is upstairs with Uncle Jake. I'm in the basement." This time, Victor was prepared. Hidden cameras had been recording the house for the past week. Motion sensors tracked movement throughout the building, and audio equipment captured conversations in every room except Emma's bedroom and playroom, spaces Victor considered sacred and off-limits to his surveillance. He'd known they were upstairs together. He'd watched them arrive separately through his phone app, had seen Jake sneak through the back entrance while Tessa dismissed Emma to the basement. What Victor hadn't expected was the tsunami of rage that hit him as he drove home. Knowing this time, he wouldn't be walking into a surprise. He'd be walking into a carefully orchestrated confrontation. The house felt different when he entered through the front door. The air seemed charged with tension, and the sounds from upstairs were unmistakably intimate. Victor moved through his home like a predator, every sense heightened, every muscle coiled for action. He found Emma exactly where he'd expected, surrounded by her coloring books and looking up at him with eyes that held far too much wisdom for a 6-year-old. "Daddy, they've been making weird noises upstairs for a long time," she said, repeating her lines from 3 weeks ago with heartbreaking consistency. "And Uncle Jake's car is in the garage next to Mommy's." Victor knelt beside his daughter, fighting to keep his voice gentle despite the storm raging inside him. "Emma, I need you to do something for me. Go pack a bag with your favorite clothes and toys. We're going to have a sleepover at Grandpa Martinez's house tonight." Emma's face lit up with genuine excitement. Victor's father-in-law was the only member of Tessa's family he'd ever respected. A retired Marine who'd built a successful plumbing business and raised his children with discipline and values. More importantly, he was someone who would understand what Victor was about to do and why it was necessary. "Should I tell Mommy we're leaving?" Emma asked, already gathering her coloring supplies. "Let's surprise her," Victor said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Go pack quickly, sweetheart. We'll leave in 10 minutes. While Emma prepared for her unexpected adventure, Victor made his way upstairs with the silent precision he'd learned during his Army service. The sounds grew louder as he approached the master bedroom. Sounds that would have destroyed a weaker man, but only strengthened Victor's resolve. He paused outside the door, listening to their conversation between moments of passion. "Can't keep doing this much longer," Jake was saying, slightly out of breath. "He's been asking more questions about my travel schedule." "You worry too much," Tessa replied, her voice carrying a breathless laugh. Victor only sees what he wants to see. He's so focused on his precious construction projects that he couldn't spot an affair if we did it on his desk. "Still, maybe we should accelerate our timeline. The money you've saved up, plus what I've managed to skim from his accounts." "Another month," Tessa interrupted. "I want to make sure we have enough for Emma's custody battle. My lawyer says we'll need at least $100,000 for legal fees if Victor decides to fight us." "And if he doesn't want custody? If he's too proud to chase after a wife who doesn't want him anymore? Then we get lucky and Emma becomes his problem to solve. Either way, we win." Victor's hand clenched around his phone, which was recording every word. In that moment, listening to them discuss Emma like she was an inconvenient obstacle rather than a human being, he felt something fundamental shift inside him. The last traces of mercy, the final threads of the man who'd once believed in forgiveness and second chances, snapped like overstressed cables. He took one photograph through the cracked door, not for legal evidence, since he already had plenty, but because he wanted them to know he'd seen them at their most vulnerable moment. Then he turned and walked away, his footsteps silent on the plush carpet. Emma was waiting by the front door with a small suitcase, her face glowing with excitement about the unexpected adventure. Victor swept her into his arms, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo and letting her presence calm the nuclear fury burning in his chest. "Ready for our sleepover?" he asked. "Ready. Will you tell me a story about when you were little?" "I'll tell you whatever you want to hear, baby girl." As they drove away from the house, Victor glanced in his rearview mirror and felt a strange sense of finality. He was leaving behind more than just a building. He was leaving behind the man he'd been for the past 12 years. The man who believed in trust and forgiveness, who'd thought love could conquer the brutal lessons of his childhood. That man was dead. What remained was the person Victor had been before Tessa softened him. Someone who understood that the world was divided into predators and prey, and the only way to survive was to ensure you were never again caught in a position of weakness. His phone buzzed with a text message from Tessa, "Working late tonight. Don't wait up." Victor smiled for the first time in weeks and typed back, "No problem. Sleep well." By the time Tessa realized he'd been in the house, by the time she and Jake understood that their careful charade had been exposed, Victor would be ready to show them exactly what happened to people who mistook his love for weakness. The war had begun, and Victor Romero had never lost a war in his life. Chapter 4. The Calm Before Destruction. The next morning brought a carefully choreographed performance of innocence. Tessa called Victor's phone 3 times before he answered, her voice carrying perfectly calibrated concern about Emma's whereabouts. "Victor, where are you? Emma's not in her room, and your car was gone when I woke up." "We had an impromptu father-daughter adventure," Victor replied, watching Emma feed ducks at the park near her grandfather's house. "You looked so peaceful sleeping. I didn't want to disturb you. You should have told me. I was worried sick." The lie came so easily that Victor almost admired her skill. According to his surveillance footage, Tessa hadn't checked Emma's room until nearly noon, and her first call had been to Jake, not to her supposedly missing daughter. "Sorry, sweetheart. We'll be home this afternoon." When they returned to the house, Victor observed his wife with a detached fascination of a scientist studying a particularly interesting specimen. She moved through the motions of concerned motherhood, hugging Emma, asking about their adventure, expressing relief that everyone was safe. But her body language betrayed her distraction. She kept checking her phone, glancing toward the stairs, touching surfaces that might have revealed evidence of Victor's presence. Jake arrived for their scheduled family dinner an hour late, claiming traffic delays that Victor knew were actually time spent coaching Tessa on how to handle any potential suspicions. He played his role perfectly: concerned uncle, grateful employee, devoted brother-in-law who'd rushed over the moment he heard about Emma's disappearance. "You can't just take off like that without telling anyone," Jake said, his tone carefully balanced between authority and affection. "What if there had been an emergency?" Victor nodded thoughtfully, as if accepting the wisdom of Jake's concern. "You're absolutely right. Family should always know where family is." The emphasis on the final sentence was subtle enough that Tessa missed it entirely, but Jake's eyes flickered with momentary uncertainty. He was smarter than Tessa, more intuitive about potential threats, but he was also arrogant enough to believe he could outmaneuver someone he'd always considered a blue-collar upstart. Over dinner, Victor played his part flawlessly while internally cataloging every detail that confirmed his surveillance evidence. The way Tessa and Jake avoided eye contact, except for brief, heated glances when they thought he wasn't looking. The synchronized checking of phones. The subtle body language that spoke of intimate familiarity disguised as casual family interaction. "I've been thinking about taking that vacation you suggested," Victor told Jake as they cleared the dinner dishes. "Maybe next weekend. Somewhere isolated, where we can really disconnect from everything." "That's a great idea," Jake replied, too quickly. "Very important to recharge. Would you mind watching Emma again? I know it's a lot to ask, but Tessa and I could really use some time alone together." Victor saw the quick exchange of glances between his wife and brother-in-law, the silent communication of conspirators who thought they'd been handed an unexpected gift. "Of course," Jake said. "Emma and I always have fun together. And maybe you could stay over," Tessa added, her voice carefully casual, "in case she needs anything during the night." "Perfect," Victor agreed. "I'll make reservations tomorrow." That night, as Tessa lay beside him pretending to sleep, Victor stared at the ceiling and finalized his plans. The vacation would indeed happen, but not in the way his wife and brother-in-law expected. Instead of providing them with an opportunity for an extended rendezvous, it would serve as the trigger for the systematic destruction of their lives. Phase 1 involved the business. Victor spent the next day meticulously documenting Jake's financial theft with his forensic accountant, creating an airtight case for criminal prosecution. He also prepared termination papers that would immediately revoke Jake's access to company accounts, facilities, and clients. But the termination would wait until after the vacation, when Jake would be too distracted by other catastrophes to mount any kind of defense. Phase 2 targeted Tessa's support network. Victor had always maintained cordial relationships with her friends and family, understanding that social connections were crucial to his wife's self-image. Now he would use those relationships to ensure that when the truth came out, Tessa would find herself completely isolated. He started with Tessa's sister, Monica, a divorced mother of two who'd always resented what she saw as Tessa's easy life. Victor called her under the pretense of planning a surprise party for Tessa's upcoming birthday. "I want to include all her closest friends," he explained. "Maybe you could help me understand who she's been spending time with lately? I've been so busy with work that I feel out of touch with her social circle." Monica was eager to help, and even more eager to share gossip about her sister's recent behavior. "Honestly, Victor, I've been worried about her," Monica confided. "She's been so secretive lately, always making excuses for why she can't do family things. And she's been spending a lot of money on clothes and trips that she says are for self-care, but it seems excessive. Has she mentioned any new friends? Anyone she might be confiding in?" "Not really. Although," Monica hesitated, "I probably shouldn't say this, but Jake's been around a lot more than usual. Like a lot more. They claim it's business stuff, helping with your company, but it just seems weird how much time they spend together." Victor let the silence stretch, allowing Monica's natural suspicion to build momentum. "I'm probably overthinking it," she added quickly. "I mean, Jake's family, but something just feels off, you know?" "I appreciate you looking out for her," Victor said. "Family should always protect family." By the end of the conversation, Victor had planted seeds of suspicion that would blossom into social destruction when the truth was revealed. Monica would remember this conversation, would realize she'd been used as an unwitting spy, and would ensure that everyone in Tessa's social circle knew exactly what kind of person they'd been defending. Phase 3 was the most delicate, preparing Emma for the changes ahead without traumatizing her or turning her against her mother. Victor had consulted with a child psychologist, Dr. Sarah Chun, under the guise of wanting to help Emma adjust to his demanding work schedule. "Children are remarkably resilient," Dr. Chun had assured him, "but they need stability and honesty appropriate to their developmental level. If major changes are coming to your family structure, the most important thing is ensuring Emma feels secure and loved." Victor arranged for Emma to spend more time with her grandfather Martinez, a man who understood the value of discipline and loyalty. He also enrolled her in martial arts classes, partly for self-defense, but mostly to instill the kind of mental toughness she'd need to navigate the world as his daughter. "Daddy, why are you teaching me so many new things?" Emma asked as they drove home from her first karate lesson. "Because the world can be a dangerous place, sweetheart. People sometimes pretend to be something they're not, and they might try to hurt the people we love. I want you to be strong enough to protect yourself and smart enough to see through their lies." Emma absorbed this information with the seriousness she applied to all of Victor's lessons. She was already beginning to understand that her father was different from other parents, harder, more demanding, but also more reliable than anyone else in her life. "Even Mommy?" she asked quietly. Victor glanced at his daughter in the rearview mirror, seeing in her eyes the same intuitive understanding that had allowed her to recognize something was wrong that first day. "Especially people who are supposed to love us," he said. "Those are the ones who can hurt us the most." As the week progressed, Victor fine-tuned every aspect of his revenge plan. He studied his enemies with the patience of a chess master, understanding their weaknesses, their fears, their dependencies. Tessa needed social approval and financial security. Jake craved respect and admiration he'd never earned. Both of them had built their self-worth on foundations that Victor could systematically destroy. By Friday evening, as he confirmed their weekend reservations at a remote cabin in the mountains, Victor felt the familiar calm that preceded decisive action. Tomorrow, Tessa and Jake would believe they were finally free to pursue their relationship openly, thinking Victor would be safely out of the way for an entire weekend. Instead, they would discover that Victor Romero had spent weeks studying them, understanding them, and preparing their complete destruction. The war wasn't coming. It was already here. Victor had simply been allowing his enemies to position themselves for total defeat. Chapter 5. The Setup. Saturday morning arrived with the crisp clarity of autumn in the Rockies. Victor loaded his truck with enough gear to suggest a serious camping trip. Tent, sleeping bags, fishing equipment, and enough food for a long weekend in the wilderness. Tessa watched from the kitchen window, her expression carefully neutral, but unable to hide the anticipation in her posture. "You sure you'll be okay without us?" Victor asked, wrapping his arms around his wife from behind in a gesture that had once been genuine affection, but now served as psychological warfare. "I'll miss you terribly," Tessa replied, her voice carrying the exact tone of forced regret she'd probably practiced in the mirror. "But sometimes a girl needs time to herself, you know?" "I know exactly what you mean," Victor said, allowing his lips to brush against her ear in a way that made her shiver. Though whether from guilt or arousal, he neither knew nor cared. Emma hugged her father goodbye with the fierce intensity of a child who sensed changes she couldn't articulate. Victor had spent the previous evening preparing her for what was coming, though not in ways she could understand at the time. "Remember what we talked about?" he whispered into her hair. "Be strong, be smart, and know that Daddy loves you more than anything in the world." "I love you too, Daddy. Catch lots of fish." "I'll catch everything I need to catch, baby girl." Victor drove exactly far enough to establish his alibi, a gas station receipt from a town 2 hours away, a conversation with a park ranger who would remember the serious man asking about isolated camping spots, a fishing license purchased with his credit card. Then he doubled back using secondary roads, arriving at a motel 15 miles from his house where he'd rented a room under a false name 2 weeks earlier. The surveillance equipment in his house transmitted to his laptop with crystal clarity. He watched Jake arrive at 11:30 a.m., using his key to enter through the front door with the confidence of someone who believed himself welcome. Tessa met him with an embrace that confirmed everything Victor needed to know about their relationship. "He's really gone?" Jake asked, his voice carrying clearly through the audio system. "Just drove off with enough gear for a week," Tessa replied. "We have a whole weekend." "And Emma?" "Swimming lessons at the club until 4, then dinner and a sleepover at Monica's. We're completely alone until tomorrow night." Victor watched them move through his house like they owned it, saw Jake examine his liquor cabinet and help himself to the 50-year-old scotch Victor had been saving for a special occasion. The irony wasn't lost on him that Jake had chosen correctly. This was indeed a special occasion, just not the kind he was anticipating. They settled into the living room, and Victor listened to them discuss their plans with the casual cruelty of people who believe themselves immune to consequences. "The Austin house will be perfect," Jake said, scrolling through property listings on his tablet. "Far enough from Denver that we won't have to deal with his attempts to stay involved with Emma." "About Emma," Tessa said, her tone shifting to something more calculating. "My lawyer thinks we might be able to negotiate sole custody if we can prove Victor's work schedule makes him an unsuitable parent. And if he fights it, then we let him have her. Honestly, Jake, I love Emma, but I'm tired of being a mother. I want to be someone's girlfriend again, someone's lover, not just a housewife and chauffeur." Victor's finger hovered over the keyboard, resisting the urge to trigger the surprise he'd prepared for later. The conversation was providing evidence that would be invaluable in custody proceedings, but more importantly, it was confirming that his decision to destroy them was not just justified, but morally necessary. "What about money?" Jay continued. "Even with what we've saved and skimmed, starting over won't be cheap." "I've been thinking about that," Tessa said, moving closer to Jake on the couch. "Victor's business is worth millions, but most of his assets are tied up in investments and property. However, there's the life insurance policy." Victor's blood turned to ice as he listened to his wife detail his life insurance. Policies worth $3.2 million that would make Tessa wealthy beyond her wildest dreams if something happened to him. "You're not seriously suggesting?" Jake started. "I'm not suggesting anything," Tessa replied quickly. "I'm just saying that sometimes life provides opportunities, and smart people recognize them when they appear." "Jesus, Tessa, that's dark even for you." Victor's job is dangerous. Construction sites, heavy equipment, long drives through mountain roads. Accidents happen all the time. The casual way she discussed his death, not with the heat of passion or anger, but with the cold calculation of someone planning a business transaction, crystallized Victor's resolve. He'd been prepared to destroy their relationship and their finances. Now he understood he needed to destroy their freedom as well. He made 2 phone calls. The first was to Carl Hoffman, his private investigator. I need you to document everything happening at my house right now, Victor said. Video, audio, photographs. And I need you to research any connections between my wife and people who might be willing to arrange accidents. Victor, that sounds like you think. I think my wife and brother-in-law are discussing the best way to murder me for insurance money. I need evidence that will convince police they're serious about it. The second call was to Elizabeth Valdez, his attorney. Elizabeth, I need you to draft emergency custody papers immediately. Full custody, based on evidence of adultery, financial theft, and conspiracy to commit murder. Murder? Victor, what exactly is happening? I'm watching my wife plan my death while her lover drinks my scotch. I need those papers ready to file first thing Monday morning, and I need you to contact the police about the conspiracy charges. Are you safe? Do you need to call 911? I'm safe, and I have everything under control. But Elizabeth, this ends Monday. I want them both in handcuffs before noon. Victor spent the rest of the afternoon documenting every detail of their weekend together. He watched them make love in his bed, eat dinner at his table, and plan his death with the casual efficiency of people discussing vacation itineraries. By evening, he had enough evidence to ensure they would never see freedom again. But mere imprisonment wasn't enough. These people had betrayed his trust, stolen his money, discussed murdering him, and planned to abandon his daughter. They deserved something more personal than prison. They deserved to understand exactly what it felt like to have their world systematically destroyed by someone they'd underestimated. At 11 p.m., Victor initiated the first phase of their destruction. Using his phone, he triggered the smart home security system he had installed the previous week, a system Jake and Tessa didn't know existed. Every door and window in the house locked automatically. The temperature dropped to 50 degrees. And the sound system began playing a recording he'd prepared specifically for this moment. Hello, Tessa. Hello, Jake. Victor's voice echoed through every room in the house, calm and controlled. I hope you've enjoyed your weekend in my home, drinking my scotch and planning my murder. Now it's time for us to have a conversation about consequences. Through his surveillance cameras, Victor watched them leap apart on the couch, their faces pale with terror as they realized their weekend getaway had become a prison. The doors are locked, the windows are sealed, and the phone lines have been cut. You're going to sit there and listen while I explain exactly what's going to happen to your lives. And then you're going to understand why crossing Victor Romero was the biggest mistake you ever made. The hunt had begun, and Victor had never felt more alive. Chapter 6. The Trap Springs. The panic in their eyes was everything Victor had hoped for. Through the surveillance feed, he watched Tessa and Jake stumble through his house like trapped animals, testing doors that wouldn't open, windows that wouldn't budge, phones that produced no dial tone. The smart home system he'd installed was military-grade, designed for maximum security estates, and it responded only to his biometric authorization or his master phone. This is insane, Jake shouted at the ceiling, apparently hoping Victor could hear him. You can't just lock us in here. Actually, I can, Victor's voice replied through the sound system, his tone conversational. It's my house, after all. You're just guests who've overstayed their welcome. Victor had positioned himself in a rental car across the street, close enough to watch the house, while maintaining plausible deniability about his location. The surveillance equipment was broadcasting to multiple devices, ensuring he captured every moment of their breakdown from different angles. Here's what's going to happen, Victor continued, his voice carrying the authority he'd learned in the army. First, you're going to tell me exactly how long you've been planning my murder. Second, you're going to explain how you intended to make it look like an accident. And third, you're going to transfer every stolen dollar back to my accounts while I watch. We weren't, Tessa started. Don't. Victor's voice cut through a protest like a blade. I've been listening to you for hours. I know about the insurance money, the Austin house, your plans to abandon Emma. I know about the money you've stolen, the lies you've told, and the murder you've been discussing. So don't insult my intelligence with denials. Through the cameras, Victor watched his wife collapse onto the couch, the reality of her situation finally sinking in. Jake, meanwhile, was examining the windows with the desperate intensity of someone beginning to understand he was trapped with a predator. You want to know the really interesting thing? Victor continued. I've been documenting your affair for weeks. I have photographs, video recordings, financial records, and now audio of you discussing my murder. My attorney has copies of everything, with instructions to release them to police if anything happens to me. Victor, please. Tessa's voice was barely a whisper. Let's explain. Oh, you'll explain everything. But first, I want you to understand what you've lost. Victor triggered the next phase of his revelation. The television screens throughout the house came alive with a slideshow he'd prepared. Bank statements showing their theft, photographs of their hotel meetings, transcripts of their text messages, and finally, the property listings for the Austin house they planned to share. Jake, Victor said, his voice hardening. In approximately 6 hours, you'll be terminated from my company and arrested for embezzlement. The evidence against you is overwhelming, and my attorney assures me you'll serve 5 to 7 years minimum. Jake's face had gone white as bone. He understood the implications better than Tessa, understood that a theft conviction would destroy any chance he had of working in construction again, would make him unemployable in any industry that required bonding or financial trust. But that's just the beginning, Victor continued. See, I've also been examining your other business dealings. The side contracts you've been running through my company's name. The permits you've been expediting with bribes. The safety violations you've been covering up. When the authorities start investigating you, they're going to find a lot more than simple embezzlement. This was a bluff, but a calculated one. Victor knew Jake's character well enough to understand he'd been cutting corners and bending rules for years. The fear in Jake's eyes confirmed that the bluff had hit home. Tessa, Victor said, turning his attention to his wife. Your situation is more complicated. See, Colorado is a no-fault divorce state, but it's not a no-consequences state. When we divorce, and we will divorce, you'll be entitled to exactly nothing. The prenup you signed covers adultery, quite specifically. What prenup? Tessa's voice was barely audible. The one your lawyer told you to read carefully before signing. The one you initialed on every page while distracted by wedding planning. You do remember your lawyer, don't you? My old army buddy who owed me a favor. The color drained from Tessa's face as she realized she'd been outmaneuvered from the very beginning. The prenup she'd barely glanced at, trusting that love would conquer all legal complications, had been written by Victor's friend specifically to protect him in case of infidelity. And then there's Emma, Victor said, his voice turning deadly soft. My daughter, who you've been planning to abandon or use as a bargaining chip. The custody evaluation will be very interested in your statements about being tired of motherhood. We never said, Jake started. I want to be someone's girlfriend again, someone's lover, not just a housewife and chauffeur. Those were your exact words, Tessa. All recorded, all time-stamped, all admissible in family court. Victor paused, letting the weight of their situation settle over them like a burial shroud. But here's the thing that really amazes me, he continued. After everything you've stolen, everything you've planned, you're still thinking like amateurs. You thought you could outmaneuver someone who built an empire from nothing? You thought I'd achieved everything I have by being trusting and forgiving. Through the surveillance cameras, Victor watched them begin to truly understand the scope of their miscalculation. They'd mistaken his love for weakness, his trust for stupidity, his happiness for complacency. So here's what's going to happen next, Victor said. You're going to transfer every stolen dollar back to my accounts. You're going to write detailed confessions about your theft, your affair, and your murder conspiracy. And you're going to do it all while my cameras record everything for posterity. And if we refuse, Jake asked, his voice cracking, then you stay locked in that house until you change your minds. The refrigerator is full, the water works, and I can keep you there for weeks if necessary. The only question is whether you want to cooperate now or after you've gotten hungry enough to see reason. Victor had no intention of actually keeping them in prison for weeks. That would cross lines that even his fury wouldn't allow him to breach. But they didn't know that, and their panic was serving his purposes perfectly. You're insane, Tessa whispered. No, Victor replied, his voice carrying the cold certainty that had carried him through every battle of his life. I'm thorough, and I'm someone who never, ever forgives a betrayal. He gave them 30 minutes to discuss their options while he prepared the final phase of their destruction. By Monday morning, Jake would be in police custody and Tessa would be facing divorce papers that would leave her with nothing but her shame. But first, he wanted them to experience the same helplessness and terror they'd planned to inflict on him. After all, Victor Romero had never been interested in mercy for his enemies. Chapter 7. The Reckoning begins. By dawn, Victor's captives had broken completely. Through the surveillance feeds, he'd watched them cycle through rage, bargaining, and finally desperate acceptance as they realized the futility of their situation. Jake had spent hours examining every possible escape route, while Tessa had retreated into a catatonic state, staring at the financial documents Victor had forced them to review. The confessions had been extracted shortly before sunrise, both of them speaking into the cameras with the hollow voices of defeated prisoners. Jake admitted to stealing $187,000 through various schemes, more than Victor had originally calculated. Tessa confessed to moving $463,000 into hidden accounts and detailed their timeline for murdering Victor, making it look like a construction accident. "We never would have actually done it," she whispered to the camera, tears streaming down her face. "It was just fantasy, just stupid talk. Fantasy." Victor's voice cut through the sound system like a whip. "You researched my insurance policies. You discussed timing. You planned how to spend the money. That's not fantasy, Tessa. That's premeditation." At 7 a.m., Victor finally released the locks and allowed them to leave. He watched from his rental car as they stumbled out of the house like survivors of a natural disaster, their clothes wrinkled, their faces pale with exhaustion and terror. Jake's hands were shaking so badly he could barely start his car. They drove away in opposite directions, Tessa to her sister's house, Jake to his apartment, neither of them understanding that their public humiliation had only just begun. Victor returned home and took a long shower, washing away the satisfaction and fury of a night's work. When Emma returned from her sleepover at noon, she found her father making pancakes in a kitchen that showed no signs of the previous night's psychological warfare. "Did you catch lots of fish, Daddy?" she asked, climbing onto his lap while he fed her breakfast. "I caught everything I went looking for, sweetheart." Emma studied his face with the intensity she'd inherited from him. "You look different. Happier." "Sometimes hunting is good for the soul," Victor replied, not entirely sure she'd understand, but knowing she'd file the comment away for future consideration. Monday morning brought the systematic destruction Victor had spent weeks orchestrating. At 8 a.m., Jake arrived at the office to find his key card deactivated and security guards waiting to escort him from the building. Victor met them in the lobby, his expression professionally neutral as he handed Jake a folder containing termination papers, criminal charges, and a bill for restitution. "You have 48 hours to return all company property and arrange payment of the money you've stolen," Victor said. "After that, the authorities take over." Jake's attempt to maintain dignity crumbled as the security guards flanked him. "Victor, we can work this out. We're family." "No," Victor replied, his voice carrying the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. "Family doesn't steal from family. Family doesn't betray family. And family sure as hell doesn't plan to murder family for insurance money." The criminal charges were filed by noon, with Victor providing boxes of evidence to a detective who seemed impressed by the thoroughness of the case. "I've never seen documentation this complete," Detective Riley commented. "Most domestic cases are he said, she said. This is like watching a confession recorded in real time." "I believe in being thorough," Victor replied. The divorce papers were served to Tessa at 2 p.m., delivered by a process server who found her hiding at her sister's house. Monica called Victor within an hour, her voice shrill with rage and confusion. "What the hell is going on, Victor? Tessa is hysterical, claiming you held them prisoner and forced confessions out of them. Did she mention the part where she and Jake were planning to murder me for the insurance money?" Victor asked calmly. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds. "That's impossible," Monica finally whispered. "I have recordings, Monica. Hours of them. Your sister and your brother discussing the best way to make my death look accidental so they could collect $3.2 million and moved to Austin together. Oh God. Oh my God. Read the divorce papers when she shows them to you. Listen to the recordings when the police play them during Jake's trial. Then ask yourself how well you really knew your siblings. By evening, Victor's phone was buzzing with calls from Tessa's friends and family members, all demanding explanations for what seemed like insanely vindictive behavior toward two people they considered victims of Victor's controlling personality. One by one, Victor provided them with evidence, financial records, surveillance footage, audio recordings that painted a picture of systematic betrayal and premeditated murder. The transformation was remarkable. Within hours, Tessa went from being seen as the victim of a controlling husband to being recognized as a would-be murderer who'd been planning to abandon her daughter. Jake's reputation in Denver's construction community was destroyed by noon Tuesday when Victor circulated the evidence to every major contractor in the city. But the most satisfying moment came Wednesday afternoon when Victor received a call from Detective Riley. "Mr. Romero, we've arrested Jake Morrison on charges of embezzlement, conspiracy to commit murder, and fraud. Based on the evidence you provided, the district attorney is confident of conviction on all counts." "What about my wife?" "The conspiracy charges are more complicated because most of the planning was verbal, but we're building a case. Her confession to moving money and planning her death gives us a good foundation. And custody of my daughter? Given the evidence of planned abandonment and the criminal charges, I don't think there will be much dispute about that." That evening, Victor sat on his back deck watching Emma play in the yard while he reviewed the financial damage assessment his forensic accountant had provided. Between the recovered stolen money, the insurance money that would never be paid, and the assets Tessa would forfeit in the divorce, he was actually in a stronger financial position than before the betrayal. But the real satisfaction came from knowing that Jake and Tessa were beginning to understand the full scope of their miscalculation. They thought they were dealing with a successful businessman who'd gotten soft in middle age. Instead, they declared war on someone who'd learned survival from the streets, strategy from the army, and ruthlessness from building an empire with his bare hands. "Daddy." Emma appeared beside his chair, her small hand resting on his arm. "Are you and Mommy getting divorced?" Victor had been dreading this conversation, but Emma's direct approach made it easier somehow. "Yes, sweetheart. Mommy made some very bad choices, and she can't live with us anymore. Because she was with Uncle Jake when she shouldn't have been." The perceptiveness of the question caught Victor off guard. "How did you know that?" "I'm not stupid, Daddy. I saw them together lots of times when you weren't home. They told me not to tell you because it was a surprise they were planning." Victor felt a new wave of fury at the realization that they'd been using his daughter to cover their affair, manipulating her natural desire to please adults into complicity with their betrayal. "You're never going to see Uncle Jake again," Victor said. "And you might not see Mommy very much either." "Good," Emma replied with startling firmness. "Uncle Jake was mean when you weren't around, and Mommy was always on her phone or telling me to go play somewhere else. Are you okay with it just being us?" Emma climbed into his lap and nestled against his chest. "We're stronger together, Daddy, just like you taught me." As the sun set over the mountains, Victor held his daughter and felt a sense of completion he hadn't experienced since discovering the betrayal. He protected what mattered, destroyed what threatened him, and ensured that justice was served with the kind of precision that courts and laws couldn't provide. Jake and Tessa had made the fatal error of mistaking his love for weakness and his trust for stupidity. Now they were learning that Victor Romero had never forgiven a betrayal in his life, and he wasn't about to start with the people who'd betrayed him most deeply. The war was nearly over, and victory had never tasted sweeter. Chapter 8. Consequences Unfold. 3 months later, Victor sat in the gallery of Denver District Court watching Jake Morrison receive his sentence. 7 years in state prison for embezzlement, conspiracy to commit murder, and fraud. The man who'd once sat at Victor's dinner table, who'd shaken his hand and called him family, now stood in orange jumpsuit shackles, his face gaunt from stress and his eyes holding the hollow look of someone who'd finally understood the true cost of his betrayal. The prosecution had been devastating in its thoroughness. Every piece of evidence Victor had provided was admissible, every recording crystal clear, every financial document ironclad. Jake's defense attorney, a public defender overwhelmed by the case, had attempted to argue that the conspiracy to commit murder was merely fantasy, desperate talk between lovers who never intended to act. District Attorney Patricia Valdez, no relation to Victor's divorce lawyer, had destroyed that argument with clinical precision. Fantasy doesn't involve researching insurance policies, she told the jury. Fantasy doesn't include detailed discussions of timing and method. Fantasy doesn't involve moving money in preparation for a new life funded by the victim's death. This was premeditation, planning, and conspiracy, nothing more and nothing less. The jury had deliberated for less than 4 hours. In the months since his arrest, Jake's life had collapsed in ways that went far beyond the legal consequences. His construction license was revoked, his professional reputation destroyed, and his assets seized to pay restitution. The woman he'd been willing to murder had abandoned him the moment his usefulness ended, refusing to visit him in jail or even accept his phone calls. "Mr. Morrison," Judge Patricia Chin said as she pronounced sentence, "you violated every trust placed in you as an employee, as a family member, and as a member of society. Your actions represent a level of betrayal that strikes at the foundation of human relationships." Victor felt no satisfaction in watching a broken man receive his punishment. The satisfaction had come months earlier, when justice was certain rather than hopeful. This was simply the conclusion of a process that had been inevitable from the moment Jake had decided to betray the man who'd given him everything. Tessa's legal situation was more complex, but no less devastating. The divorce had been finalized 6 weeks after the initial filing, with Victor receiving full custody of Emma, complete control of all marital assets, and a restraining order that prohibited Tessa from coming within 500 feet of their daughter. The criminal charges against Tessa were harder to prosecute than those against Jake, since much of her involvement had been verbal rather than documented. But the conspiracy charges were solid enough that her attorney had negotiated a plea bargain: 3 years probation, full restitution of the stolen money, and testimony against Jake in exchange for avoiding prison time. The testimony had been the final humiliation. In open court, Tessa had detailed their affair, their theft, and their murder planning with the mechanical precision of someone who'd been broken by circumstances beyond her control. She'd admitted to being willing to abandon Emma, to stealing nearly $500,000, and to encouraging Jake's violent fantasies about Victor's death. "I lost my mind," she'd whispered into the microphone. "I lost sight of everything that mattered and convinced myself that what we were doing was justified." Victor had watched from the gallery as his wife, his ex-wife, destroyed any remaining sympathy she might have claimed. The woman who'd once made him believe in love and family had revealed herself to be someone capable of planning his murder for insurance money. But perhaps the most satisfying consequence had been the social destruction that followed their exposure. Denver's elite circles were small and unforgiving, and news of the affair and murder conspiracy had spread through the community like wildfire. Tessa found herself blacklisted from every social organization she'd valued, expelled from the country club, and shunned by friends who couldn't reconcile the woman they'd known with the criminal she'd proven to be. Jake's family had disowned him completely. His parents had issued a public statement expressing their shock and apologizing to Victor for their son's actions. His younger sister had changed her last name to distance herself from the scandal. "The hardest part," Monica had told Victor during one of their awkward conversations about Emma's welfare, "is realizing we never really knew them. Tessa was always self-centered, but this? Planning to murder your husband and abandon your daughter? I don't even recognize her anymore." Victor had accepted Monica's attempt at reconciliation with professional courtesy, but no warmth. She'd been too quick to believe Tessa's initial claims of victimhood, too willing to assume Victor was the villain in their marriage's collapse. Trust, once lost, was something Victor never restored. The financial consequences were equally comprehensive. Tessa had been forced to liquidate her hidden assets, sell her car, and move into a studio apartment in one of Denver's less desirable neighborhoods. The woman who'd lived in $1 million home and spent money like water now worked as a retail clerk, struggling to make ends meet while paying restitution and legal fees. Jake's assets had been seized entirely, leaving him with nothing but prison debts and the certainty that his future after release would be spent working minimum-wage jobs that didn't require background checks. But the most important consequence was Emma's stability and happiness. In the months since Tessa's departure, Victor's daughter had bloomed in ways that made him realize how much stress the toxic environment had created for her. She was more confident, more open, more willing to share her thoughts and feelings without fear of being dismissed or ignored. "I don't miss the fighting," Emma had told him one evening as they worked on her homework together. "I don't miss feeling like I was always bothering someone." "You never bother me, sweetheart." "I know, Daddy. That's why I like it being just us." Dr. Chun, the child psychologist, had confirmed Victor's observations during their regular sessions. "Emma is thriving," she'd reported. "Children are remarkably resilient when they feel secure and loved." The removal of instability and conflict from her environment has allowed her natural personality to emerge. Victor had enrolled Emma in private school, where her intelligence and determination had impressed teachers who described her as mature beyond her years, but still appropriately childlike in her enthusiasms. She'd made friends, excelled academically, and shown no signs of psychological damage from her mother's abandonment. Some children would be devastated by this kind of family trauma, Dr. Chun had explained. But Emma has always had one completely reliable parent who prioritized her welfare above everything else. That foundation of security is allowing her to process these changes without significant psychological damage. The business had thrived as well. Jake's removal had eliminated the inefficiencies and ethical compromises that had been slowly corrupting Victor's company culture. The publicity from the criminal case had actually enhanced Victor's reputation in Denver's business community, where his handling of the betrayal was seen as evidence of strong character and decisive leadership. "You could have covered it up," his friend and fellow contractor Miguel Sandoval had told him. "Handled it quietly, avoided the public spectacle. Most people would have taken the path of least resistance." "Most people don't understand that cancer needs to be cut out completely," Victor had replied. "Half measures just allow the disease to spread." Now, as Victor left the courthouse after Jake's sentencing, he reflected on the completeness of his victory. His enemies had been destroyed professionally, financially, socially, and legally. His daughter was safe, happy, and growing stronger every day. His business was more successful than ever. But more importantly, Victor had proven to himself that the man who'd crawled out of poverty and violence was still there beneath the surface. The man who understood that the world was divided into predators and prey, and that survival required ensuring you were never again caught in a position of weakness. As he drove home to pick up Emma from school, Victor allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. He'd won completely, and his enemies would spend years, if not decades, paying for their betrayal. Justice, Victor reflected, was sometimes a dish best served with overwhelming force. Chapter 9. Victory and New Beginnings. 1 year after Jake's sentencing, Victor stood in the backyard of his new house, a custom-built fortress in the foothills overlooking Denver, designed with security systems that would make the previous year's improvised prison look primitive. Emma was practicing martial arts forms on the wooden deck he'd built for her training, her movements precise and confident under the guidance of Master Chun, the retired Marine Corps instructor Victor had hired as her personal coach. "Higher with the block, Emma," Master Chun called out. "Remember, in a real situation, hesitation gets you hurt." Emma adjusted her stance and repeated the movement with the kind of focused intensity that reminded Victor of himself at that age. The intensity of someone who understood that the world was dangerous and that strength was the only reliable protection. "Good," Victor said as Emma finished her routine. "But remember, the goal isn't just to defend yourself. It's to make sure anyone who threatens you regrets the decision." Emma nodded seriously, wiping sweat from her forehead with the towel Victor handed her. At 7 years old, she was already showing signs of the mental toughness that would serve her well in life. She'd adapted to her new reality with remarkable resilience, and Victor was proud of the strong, independent girl she was becoming. The doorbell rang, and Victor checked his security monitor to see Carl Hoffman, his private investigator, standing on the front porch with a manila envelope. Victor had continued employing Hoffman for various security matters, background checks on potential employees, due diligence on business partners, and occasional surveillance of people who'd shown interest in his affairs. "What do you have for me, Carl?" Victor asked as he opened the door. "Updates on your former wife and brother-in-law," Hoffman replied, settling into the living room chair that had become his usual spot during these quarterly briefings. Victor poured himself a scotch, not the bottle Jake had stolen, which he'd thrown away rather than drink something contaminated by betrayal, and waited for the report. Jake Morrison was released on parole last month after serving 18 months, Hoffman began. He's living in a halfway house in Colorado Springs, working the night shift at a warehouse that loads trucks. His parole officer says he's been compliant, but describes him as broken, no initiative, no plans, just going through the motions of existence. Victor nodded. 18 months in state prison would have been educational for someone like Jake, who'd spent his life coasting on charm and family connections. The reality of being surrounded by men who'd lived hard lives and had no patience for entitled weakness would have destroyed whatever remained of his self-image. "Any contact with Tessa?" Victor asked. "None. She won't take his calls, won't visit, won't even acknowledge his existence." Jake's cellmate told his girlfriend that Jake spends most of his time writing letters that never get answered. The information satisfied Victor in ways that simple imprisonment couldn't. Jake wasn't just paying for his crimes. He was experiencing the same betrayal and abandonment he'd planned to inflict on Victor. The woman he'd been willing to commit murder for had discarded him the moment he became a liability rather than an asset. "What about Tessa?" Hoffman's expression grew more serious. "That's more complicated. She completed her probation 6 months ago, finished paying restitution, and has been working as a bookkeeper for a small accounting firm in Aurora. But there have been some concerning developments." Victor set down his scotch, his attention sharpening. "What kind of developments?" "She's been asking questions about you and Emma. Indirect questions, through mutual acquaintances, about your routines, your security, Emma's school. Nothing actionable, but persistent enough to suggest she's planning something." "Planning what?" "Unknown. Could be legitimate desire to reconnect with her daughter. Could be something else entirely." "But Victor, there's something else you need to know." Hoffman opened the manila envelope and spread several photographs across the coffee table. They showed Tessa meeting with a man Victor didn't recognize, someone with the lean build and watchful eyes of someone comfortable with violence. His name is Derek Walsh. Former military, dishonorable discharge for assault, multiple arrests for assault and battery. He's been seen with Tessa 6 times over the past month, always in locations where they thought they wouldn't be noticed. Victor studied the photographs with growing interest rather than concern. "What's their relationship?" "Unclear. Could be romantic, could be professional. But Walsh has a history of taking money for security work that crossed legal boundaries. If Tessa hired him, it's not for legitimate purposes." "Any indication of specific plans?" "Not yet, but my instincts tell me she's building up to something. The questions about your security, the meetings with Walsh, the way she's been careful to stay under the radar, it feels like preparation." Victor leaned back in his chair, considering the implications. A year of punishment had apparently not been enough to teach Tessa the futility of opposing him. If anything, her time in exile had simply allowed her resentment to fester into something more dangerous. "Keep watching her," Victor said. "I want to know everything. Where she lives, where she works, who she talks to, what she buys. And give me everything you can find on this Walsh character." "Already working on it." "But Victor, if she's planning something violent, then she's about to learn that I've spent the past year preparing for exactly that possibility." After Hoffman left, Victor walked through his house, mentally cataloging the security measures he'd implemented. Motion sensors, cameras, reinforced doors and windows, a safe room that could withstand sustained assault, and communication systems that would bring armed response within minutes. The house was a fortress, but it was also a trap for anyone foolish enough to threaten what Victor protected. Emma appeared in the doorway, having finished her shower and changed into regular clothes. "Was that Mr. Hoffman?" she asked. "Yes, sweetheart. Just routine business." Is mommy causing trouble again? The directness of the question didn't surprise Victor. Emma had always been perceptive, and the past year had sharpened her instincts about potential threats to their stability. Maybe, Victor replied honestly. But if she is, we're ready for it. Emma nodded with a matter-of-fact acceptance of someone who'd learned that life included people who couldn't be trusted or reasoned with. Are you going to hurt her if she tries to hurt us? Victor knelt to his daughter's eye level, studying the serious expression on her young face. Emma, I will do whatever is necessary to protect you. That's what fathers do. They make sure their children are safe, no matter what the cost. Even if it means being scary. Sometimes being scary is the only way to protect the people you love. Emma hugged him fiercely, and Victor felt the familiar surge of protective fury that had driven every decision over the past year. His daughter understood the world in ways that most adults never would. Understood that safety required strength, that threats required elimination, and that love sometimes wore the face of control violence. That evening, after Emma was asleep, Victor stood on his deck overlooking the city lights of Denver and considered his options. If Tessa was indeed planning some kind of revenge or rescue attempt involving Emma, she would need to be stopped with the same thoroughness that had characterized his response to her original betrayal. But this time would be different. This time, Victor wouldn't need to gather evidence or build legal cases. This time, he could respond to a direct threat with direct action, and no court in the world would question a father's right to protect his child from a woman who'd already proven herself capable of planning murder. Victor's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. You took everything from me. Now I'm going to take everything from you. Victor smiled as he screenshot the message and forwarded it to Hoffman. Tessa had just provided the evidence he'd need to justify whatever response became necessary. Some people never learned. They mistook patience for weakness, preparation for paranoia, and love for something that could be exploited rather than something that made him more dangerous than they could possibly imagine. Victor Romero had built his life on the principle that betrayal was never forgiven and threats were eliminated completely. If his ex-wife wanted to test that principle, she was welcome to try. After all, he'd spent the past year preparing for exactly this moment, and he'd never lost a war in his life. The foundation was complete, the trap was set, and Victor was ready for whatever came next. Because some lessons could only be taught once, and Victor intended to make sure this one was memorable. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome to Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thrilled you've joined us today and truly appreciate your support. We're curious. Where in the world are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Architect. Vincent Harlow stood at the edge of his property, watching as the sun set over the lake he'd built his dream home beside. At 43, he had everything most men would envy. A successful architectural firm, wealth accumulated through years of disciplined work, and a wife who was the envy of his peers. Yet something felt hollow about their 15-year marriage to Diana. Beautiful view, came a voice from behind him. Vincent turned to see his brother-in-law, Paul Lambert, walking toward him with 2 glasses of whiskey. It should be. Cost enough to have this lot cleared just right, Vincent replied, accepting the drink. Diana's inside, finalizing details for the reunion next week. You ready for the Lambert clan invasion? Vincent took a long sip. As ready as I'll ever be. The truth was, Vincent dreaded these gatherings. Diana's family, the wealthy, old-money Lamberts, had never fully accepted him. Despite his own success, they viewed him as an outsider who'd somehow tricked their princess into marriage. Only Paul treated him like a genuine brother. How are things between you two anyway? Paul asked, his voice careful. Vincent studied the amber liquid in his glass. Fine. Busy. The Milan project has me traveling too much. That's what I figured, Paul muttered, looking uncomfortable. Listen, Vince. Mr. Harlow. The moment was interrupted by Leon, Vincent's assistant, hurrying across the lawn. I'm sorry to disturb you, but there's an urgent call from the contractor in Seattle. Vincent nodded at Paul. Rain, check on that conversation. As he walked away, Vincent missed the troubled look on Paul's face, the look of a man who knew something devastating and couldn't decide whether to tell. Later that night, Vincent found Diana in their bedroom, organizing photo albums. The Milan designs were approved, he said, loosening his tie. I'll need to fly out next Tuesday. Diana didn't look up. During the family reunion? We've had this planned for months, Vincent. It can't be helped. 3 days, then I'll be back. You're always leaving, Diana said, her voice tight. Everyone notices, you know. My mother asked if we were separated and just hadn't announced it yet. Vincent felt a flare of anger. Maybe if your family weren't so judgmental about my work. It's not just them, Diana interrupted, finally meeting his eyes. I noticed too. Something in her gaze made Vincent pause. There was resentment there, but also something else. Guilt? Before he could pursue it, Diana's phone buzzed with a text. She glanced at it, then quickly turned the phone face down. Who's that at this hour? Vincent asked. Just Meredith about the catering, Diana answered too quickly. She stood up, gathering the albums. I should get these downstairs. Vincent watched her leave, the tension in her shoulders obvious. He'd built a career, noticing details, and lately, the details in his marriage formed a troubling pattern. Hushed phone calls, unexplained absences, emotional distance. He moved to the window, looking out at the massive oak tree they'd preserved when building the house. Diana had insisted on it, claiming it had character. Now its shadow loomed over their bedroom like a warning. The next morning, Vincent found an unfamiliar cufflink under their bed while retrieving a dropped pen. Silver with a distinctive blue stone, definitely not his. He pocketed it without comment, a cold feeling settling in his stomach. Over dinner that evening, he studied his wife's face, still beautiful at 40, with dark hair and the elegant features that had captivated him when they'd met at a charity function nearly 2 decades ago. They'd been seated at the same table, Vincent there to network for his fledgling firm, Diana representing her family's charitable foundation. I think I'll stay the whole week for the reunion, Vincent said suddenly. The Milan trip can wait. Diana looked up, surprise evident. Really? What changed? I've been neglecting what matters, he said, watching her closely. Time to correct that. A flicker of something, alarm, crossed Diana's face before she smiled. That's wonderful. Everyone will be so pleased. Vincent nodded, taking a sip of wine. I'm sure they will. That night, he lay awake, turning the foreign cufflink between his fingers in the darkness. Diana slept beside him, her breathing even. Vincent had built his success on careful planning and attention to detail. Now, those same skills would serve a different purpose. The architect would begin designing something new, the perfect unveiling of the truth. Chapter 2. The Reunion. The Lambert family reunion transformed Vincent and Diana's lakeside mansion into a showcase of forced smiles and whispered conversations. Diana flitted between groups like a socialite on stage, her laugh a pitch higher than natural. Vincent observed it all with newfound clarity, noticing the glances that followed his wife, the way certain relatives avoided his eyes. Vincent carried a crystal tumbler of bourbon as he navigated through clusters of Diana's family. The Lamberts had always been a tight-knit group, cousins who summered together in the Hamptons, uncles who brokered business deals over golf, and who maintained the social calendar with military precision. Despite 15 years of marriage, Vincent remained the outsider, the self-made man who'd climbed his way up without their pedigree. Vincent, darling, Diana's mother, Vivian Lambert, approached with her perpetual look of mild disappointment. Diana tells me you almost missed our gathering for work again. Plans change, Vivian, Vincent replied evenly. I wouldn't miss this. How thoughtful, she said with a thin smile. Have you met Diana's old friend Nolan? He's just returned from managing our family investments in Europe. Vincent turned to see a tall man with salt and pepper hair engaged in animated conversation with Diana across the room. She laughed at something he said, touching his arm longer than necessary. We haven't been formally introduced, Vincent said, his voice controlled despite the tightening in his chest. The man wore silver cufflinks with blue stones that caught the light. You must remedy that, Vivian said. Nolan Blackwell has been such a dear friend to our family for years. Practically grew up with Diana. Vincent watched as Diana leaned in to whisper something to Nolan, their heads close together. The body language between them spoke volumes. I believe I'll get a refill first, Vincent said, lifting his still full glass and walking away. In the kitchen, he found Paul mixing drinks away from the crowd. You look like hell, Paul commented. Nolan Blackwell, Vincent said flatly. Tell me about him. Paul paused mid-pour. Why? Because my wife is practically draped over him in my living room, and I found his cufflink under our bed. Paul cursed under his breath. I try to tell you, Vince. Been trying for months. How long? At least a year, maybe longer. Diana and Nolan were high school sweethearts before she met you. Her parents always hoped they'd end up together. Old money marrying old money. When Nolan took the position in Europe 8 years ago, I thought it was over. He returned 6 months ago. Vincent's hand tightened around his glass. And everyone knows, not everyone, but many suspect. Paul hesitated. The family has always been protective of Diana. They see you as temporary, Nolan as inevitable. The weight of this betrayal, not just by Diana, but by her entire family, settled over Vincent like concrete. He'd been building a life while they waited for it to crumble. I appreciate your honesty, Vincent said finally. What will you do? Vincent's eyes turned cold. Observe. For now. The next day, Diana gathered everyone in the grand living room for a special presentation. Vincent watched from the periphery as she stood before the assembled family, radiant in a blue dress that matched her eyes. Thank you all for coming to our home, Diana began. This reunion is special, not just a gathering, but a celebration of our family's history and connections. Assistants passed out leather-bound books to each family member. Vincent received his last. I've created memory books for everyone who matters, Diana announced with a smile. Each one is personalized with photos and memories specific to your place in our family. Vincent opened his book to find blank pages except for a sticky note that said, maybe try being present next year. He looked up to see Diana watching him, challenge in her eyes. The room fell silent as people noticed the exchange. Vincent felt dozens of eyes on him, waiting for his reaction, the outsider being publicly humiliated. Across the room, Nolan Blackwell smirked behind his champagne flute. Vincent closed the book calmly. Without a word, he placed it on a side table and walked out, ignoring the whispers that erupted behind him. He drove aimlessly for hours, the humiliation burning through him. When he finally returned home well after midnight, the house was quiet. He went to his study and locked the door, pulling out the evidence he'd been gathering. The cufflink, screenshots of text messages he'd discovered by accessing Diana's cloud backup, hotel receipts. Vincent had built his career by understanding structure, knowing exactly where pressure points existed and how much weight they could bear before failing. Now, he would apply that knowledge differently. It was time to design a collapse. Chapter 3. The Scream. The morning after the memory book incident, Vincent emptied Diana's side of their master bedroom closet. Every designer dress, every pair of shoes, every piece of jewelry he'd given her over 15 years, all removed. In their place, he installed a single, custom-made item. Then he left the house before dawn, telling no one where he was going. The reunion continued without him, the Lambert family filling his home with laughter that didn't include him. Diana made excuses for his absence. Her smile strained as relatives offered sympathy for her difficult marriage. Nolan Blackwell was particularly attentive, his hand finding the small of Diana's back when he thought no one was looking. What they didn't realize was that Vincent had installed new security cameras throughout the house before leaving, cameras that fed directly to his private server. Vincent checked into the lakeside inn under a different name and watched the feed from his laptop. He saw Diana and Nolan slip into his home office after dinner, saw them kiss against his desk, heard Nolan say, "How much longer do we have to wait?" Diana's answer, "The paperwork is with my lawyer. Once it's filed, everything changes," confirmed what Vincent had suspected. She was planning to divorce him, likely taking half of everything he'd built. On the third morning, Vincent returned home before sunrise. Most guests were still asleep in the various guest rooms and cottages on the property. He entered silently, using his knowledge of which floorboards creaked to move through the house undetected. In the master bedroom, Diana slept alone, her face peaceful in the dim light. Vincent stood watching her for a long moment, remembering the woman he'd fallen in love with and wondering when she'd become this stranger. He left without waking her. Hours later, Diana opened her closet door and screamed so loudly that guests came running from all corners of the house. When they arrived, they found her staring in horror at a life-sized photograph hanging where her clothes had been. The image showed Diana and Nolan in an intimate embrace on the desk in Vincent's office, taken just the previous evening. Across the bottom in bold red lettering were the words, "Maybe try being loyal next year." But what truly horrified Diana wasn't just the exposure of her affair. It was the other items visible in the giant photograph. On Vincent's desk, clearly displayed, were documents, the same divorce papers she'd been secretly preparing, along with a prenuptial agreement she thought had been destroyed years ago. In the photo, these papers were organized neatly beside a folder labeled evidence that hadn't been there during her rendezvous with Nolan. Vincent had known everything, had been watching, planning. "What's happening?" Vivian Lambert demanded, pushing through the crowd to reach her daughter. She stopped short at the sight of the photograph, her face draining of color. "Where is Vincent?" Diana whispered, her voice shaking. As if summoned, Vincent appeared in the doorway, his expression unnervingly calm. The crowd parted silently as he walked to stand before his wife. "The reunion isn't over," he said quietly. "In fact, the real family gathering is just beginning." Diana's phone rang, cutting through the tension. She answered it with trembling hands. As she listened, her face crumpled. "What? That's impossible." When she hung up, she looked at Vincent with dawning horror. "What have you done?" "The Lambert Foundation accounts, they're frozen. Our family trust." "Not frozen," Vincent corrected. "Transferred. Temporarily. Just to get everyone's attention." Gasps rippled through the assembled relatives. "You can't do that." Nolan stepped forward, his confidence faltering under Vincent's cold stare. "I haven't done anything illegal, Nolan. Diana made me trustee of the family accounts 3 years ago during the tax restructuring. Her idea, ironically. I've simply moved assets to protect them while we sort out some discrepancies I've discovered." Vincent turned to address the stunned family. "I suggest everyone join me in the great room in 1 hour. I've prepared a presentation of my own." His eyes settled on Diana, a memory book of sorts for everyone who matters. As he walked away, Vincent heard his wife collapse into sobs behind him. He felt nothing but a cold certainty that what he was about to do was justified. The Lamberts had considered him an outsider for 15 years. They were about to discover what that truly meant, because outsiders had nothing to lose. Chapter 4. The Architect's Blueprint. 1 hour later, the Lambert family gathered in the great room, their earlier festive mood replaced by anxious murmuring. Vincent had arranged the seating like a theater, with himself standing beside a large screen at the front. He wore a perfectly tailored suit, armor for the battle ahead. "Please, everyone take a seat," Vincent said, his voice carrying the same authoritative tone he used in business presentations. "What I'm about to share concerns all of you." Diana sat in the front row, her face pale, her mother beside her clutching her hand. Nolan had positioned himself strategically near the door, as if contemplating escape. "For 15 years, Vincent began, I've been part of this family in name, if never truly in spirit. The architect who built houses but was never welcomed home." He clicked a remote, and the screen displayed the Lambert family tree. "I studied this diagram when Diana and I first married. I memorized names, relationships, histories. I wanted to belong." The next slide showed photos of various family gatherings where Vincent stood slightly apart, his smile forced. Others turned away from him. "I accepted my role as outsider. But what I never accepted, what I will never accept, is betrayal." Vincent clicked again, and the photo of Diana and Nolan appeared on screen. A collective intake of breath filled the room. "An affair would have been painful enough," Vincent continued, his voice steady. But this was more. This was a conspiracy. The next slides revealed text messages between Diana and various family members discussing Vincent as a temporary inconvenience, planning how his eventual departure would restore the natural order. Messages from Vivian to Diana. Nolan has always been your future. Vincent was a rebellion. From cousins offering to hide assets before the split. From Diana's father discussing how to minimize what Vincent could claim. You weren't just expecting our marriage to fail, Vincent said, looking directly at Vivian. You were ensuring it. Diana stood up shakily. Vincent, please. I'm not finished. He cut her off, his voice sharp enough to make her sink back into her seat. Each of you played a role in this deception. And now each of you will face consequences precisely matched to your involvement. He clicked to the next slide, which displayed the organizational chart of the Lambert family businesses and foundation. As Diana's husband, I've been given surprising access over the years. Signatures on documents when Diana was too busy. Authority granted during tax restructuring. Power of attorney for certain accounts when international transfers were needed. Small things that seemed inconsequential at the time. Nolan stepped forward. Whatever you think you've done, our lawyers will undo it by tomorrow. Vincent smiled thinly. Your lawyers can certainly try. But understand this. I've spent 8 months preparing ever since I found this. He held up the bluestone cufflink. Each step has been vetted by my own legal team to ensure it's reversible but time-consuming to unravel. I don't want your money. I want your attention. Paul, who had been watching silently from the side, finally spoke. What exactly are you demanding, Vince? Honesty, accountability, and then separation. I'll release everything back to appropriate control once certain conditions are met. Vincent clicked to a new slide showing a document titled Separation Agreement. This isn't a divorce settlement. It's a severing of ties with the entire Lambert family. Diana will retain ownership of her personal assets minus what she contributed to the deception fund against me. The foundation will undergo an independent audit, and every person in this room will sign a non-interference agreement, legally barring you from contact with me or any of my ventures going forward. The room erupted in outraged protests. Vincent let them continue for exactly 30 seconds before raising his hand. You have 24 hours to agree to my terms. After that, I release evidence of certain irregularities I've discovered in the Foundation's offshore accounts to the appropriate authorities. Diana gasped. You wouldn't. I didn't go looking for it, Vincent said quietly. I was just being thorough. But once found, such information becomes a responsibility. Vivian stood up, her aristocratic face flushed with anger. This is blackmail. This is architecture, Vincent corrected. I'm simply showing you the structural weaknesses in the house you built. You can choose to repair them properly, or you let the implication hang in the air. As the family dissolved into panicked discussions, Vincent walked calmly out of the room. He had prepared a small office in the boathouse by the lake where he would wait for their decision. As he crossed the lawn, he heard footsteps behind him and turned to see Paul following. That was brutal, Paul said when he caught up. But necessary, Vincent replied. For what it's worth, I never knew how deep it went. The messages, the planning. Paul shook his head. I knew about the affair, not the conspiracy. Vincent studied his brother-in-law, the one Lambert who had ever treated him with genuine respect. I believe you. That's why your name isn't on my list. Paul looked relieved, then troubled. What happened to you, Vince? The man I knew wouldn't go this far. Vincent gazed out at the lake, its surface deceptively smooth despite the currents beneath. The man you knew discovered that while he was building a life, others were designing its collapse. It changes your perspective. In the boathouse, Vincent sat at his makeshift desk and opened his laptop. On screen was a program showing 24 countdowns, one for each member of the Lambert family involved in the conspiracy. Beside each name was a folder containing the specific evidence he'd use if they refused his terms. This wasn't just revenge. It was recalibration, a lesson in consequences. Vincent checked his watch. 23 hours and 42 minutes remained. Chapter 5. The Counterattack. Night fell over the lake house, but few among the Lamberts found rest. Lights burned in every corner of the property as urgent conversations continued. Vincent observed it all from his boathouse sanctuary, where security feeds showed him the aftermath of his revelation. Diana paced in their bedroom, alternating between tearful phone calls to family lawyers and angry confrontations with Nolan, whose confident facade had crumbled under pressure. Vivian Lambert had assembled the family elders in the dining room, their hushed deliberations punctuated by occasional shouts. Shortly after midnight, Vincent's secure phone rang, a line known only to his most trusted associates. "It's done," said the voice on the other end. "All electronic devices belonging to the primary targets have been successfully cloned. Live monitoring is active." "And the backup files?" Vincent asked. "Secured at all 3 locations. Even if they find one, the others remain protected." "Thank you, Mira." Vincent ended the call. Mira Vega had been Vincent's head of security for 5 years, originally hired to protect his architectural designs from corporate espionage. Now her skills served a more personal mission. She was one of 3 people Vincent trusted implicitly, people who had no connection to the Lamberts. At 3:17 a.m., Vincent's monitoring system alerted him to movement on the property. Diana was walking purposefully toward the boathouse, alone. Vincent considered his options, then unlocked the door remotely, watching her approach on camera. She entered looking exhausted, her earlier polish gone. "We need to talk," she said, taking in the Spartan setup of his temporary command center. "I believe I was clear earlier," Vincent replied. "You have," he checked his watch, 20 hours and 14 minutes to provide written acceptance of my terms. "You've lost your mind," Diana said, her voice rising. "Do you understand what you're doing? These are powerful people with connections everywhere. These are people who conspired against me for years while eating at my table and sleeping under my roof," Vincent countered, his calm unbroken. "And you led them." Diana's expression shifted, calculation replacing outrage. "Vincent," she said, her voice softening as she moved closer. "We can work this out, just the 2 of us. Whatever you think you saw or heard." "Stop." Vincent's voice cut like a blade. "You're wearing the same perfume you wore the night we met. The same earrings I gave you on our 10th anniversary. Your hair is down the way I always preferred. You've adjusted your strategy from confrontation to seduction in the time it took to walk from the house to here." Diana froze, caught in her manipulation. "I've watched you perform for 15 years, Diana. I know all your scenes by heart." Her facade crumbled. "Fine. Let's be honest then. You want to know why I turned to Nolan? Because he sees me, the real me. Not just some trophy or accessory to his success." "Is that what you told yourself?" Vincent asked. "That I saw you as an accessory? I built my life around you. Designed homes with your preferences in mind. Created spaces for the family we never had because your career always came first." "A family?" Diana laughed bitterly. "You were never home long enough to have a family. Always another project, another city. And yet somehow, Nolan found you during those absences. Curious how that worked." Diana's eyes narrowed. "What does that mean?" Vincent opened a drawer and removed a thin file. 3 years ago, I was approached about a major project in Singapore. Career-defining. I turned it down because you had just taken over as director of the foundation and needed me here. 6 months later, the Milan project came up. Less prestigious, but requiring frequent travel. You insisted I take it. He slid the file toward her. Inside were emails between Diana and Nolan, dated before the Milan project was ever offered. "You created my absences, Diana. Arranged them through your father's business connections. You manufactured the very distance you then used to justify your betrayal." Diana stared at the evidence, her carefully constructed narrative collapsing. "How long have you known?" "Does it matter?" Vincent closed the file. "What matters is what happens now." "And what is that exactly?" Her voice had turned cold. "You destroy my family out of spite." "No. I offer terms that are actually quite reasonable, given the circumstances. You and your family sever all connections with me and my business interests. I return control of the foundation and accounts. We all move forward separately." Diana studied him. "And if we refuse?" "Then I do what any responsible citizen would do when they discover financial irregularities in a charitable foundation. I report them." "You'd really do that?" After 15 years. Vincent met her gaze steadily. 15 years during which you and your family plotted against me? Yes, I would. Diana stood, smoothing her clothes with practiced composure. You've changed, Vincent. No, he corrected. I've finally seen clearly. There's a difference. As she reached the door, he added, one more thing, Diana. The house is mine. Solely. Check the deed you signed 3 years ago when we refinanced. Another detail you overlooked while focusing on your extraction plan. Diana's face showed genuine shock for the first time. That's impossible. It's architecture, Vincent replied. The details matter. After she left, Vincent allowed himself a moment of exhaustion. He had expected Diana's midnight approach, had prepared for it, but the emotional toll was still significant. What he hadn't expected was the knock that came just 30 minutes later. This time, it was Nolan Blackwell who entered the boathouse, his handsome face set in determined lines. I've come to make a deal, he said without preamble. Vincent leaned back in his chair. You have nothing I want. I have information about who else was involved, things even you don't know. Nolan's confidence was returning. Diana isn't the mastermind you think. There are others who've been working against you from the beginning. Vincent studied the man who had been sleeping with his wife. You'd betray the Lamberts to save yourself? I'd provide additional context that might influence how you distribute consequences, Nolan corrected smoothly. For appropriate considerations. Vincent almost admired the man's shamelessness. What kind of considerations? Immunity from whatever you're planning. A guarantee that my name stays out of any public disclosures. And, Nolan hesitated, then plunged ahead, access to your Singapore contacts. I know you turned down the project, but you made connections there. The request confirmed what Vincent had suspected. Nolan wasn't just after Diana. He was after Vincent's professional network, his hard-earned business relationships. Sit down, Vincent said, gesturing to a chair. Tell me about these others I don't know about. For the next hour, Vincent listened as Nolan detailed a wider conspiracy than even he had uncovered, involving Diana's cousins in banking, her father's political connections, even Paul's wife, Melissa. With each revelation, Nolan grew more animated, clearly believing he was purchasing his immunity. When Nolan finally finished, Vincent nodded thoughtfully. That's very comprehensive. So we have a deal? Nolan asked eagerly. No. Vincent pressed a key on his laptop, and a room filled with the playback of Nolan's entire confession. But I appreciate your contribution to my evidence file. Nolan's face contorted with fury. You son of a... I choose my next words carefully, Vincent interrupted. Everything in this room is being recorded. And unlike you, I only make deals I intend to honor. After Nolan stormed out, Vincent sent the recording to his secure server and updated his countdown files with the new information. The architect's blueprint was becoming more detailed by the hour. As dawn broke over the lake, Vincent watched the main house through his window. One by one, lights were turning on as the Lamberts faced the day of decision. Their 24 hours were half gone, and the foundation of their carefully constructed world was already showing cracks. Chapter 6: The Revelation. By mid-afternoon, the tension at the lake house had reached a breaking point. Vincent's monitoring showed the Lamberts divided into factions. Those who wanted to fight, led by Vivian. Those who wanted to settle, including most of the younger generation who feared for their inheritances, and a smaller group, including Diana's father Howard, who were suspiciously quiet. Vincent had expected this fracturing. The Lamberts had always maintained a facade of family unity, but beneath it ran currents of competition and self-interest. Under pressure, those currents were becoming riptides. What he hadn't expected was the black sedan that arrived at the property gate at precisely 2 p.m. The security feed showed a woman in her 60s emerging from the back seat, a woman Vincent recognized immediately despite having met her only twice before. Eleanor Lambert, Diana's grandmother and the true matriarch of the family. According to Diana, Eleanor had retired to Switzerland years ago, removing herself from family affairs. Yet here she was, moving with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to command, flanked by 2 men who were clearly more than drivers. Vincent watched as the Lamberts scrambled to greet her, their faces showing varying degrees of surprise and concern. He turned up the audio feed from the main hall. Enough of this circus. Eleanor's voice was clear and commanding. Where's Vincent Harlow? Diana stepped forward. Grandma, you shouldn't have come. Your health is fine. Eleanor cut her off. I've spent 10 hours on a plane because my family is too incompetent to handle a single architect without creating a spectacle. Now, where is he? Vincent smiled despite himself. He'd always wondered where Diana's steel came from. Now he knew. He sent a text to the phone of Eleanor's driver, the boathouse. Come alone. 15 minutes later, Eleanor Lambert entered Vincent's temporary headquarters, declining his offer of assistance with a wave of her hand. She surveyed the space with shrewd eyes before settling into the chair across from him. Mr. Harlow, she said, it seems you've caused quite a commotion in my family. Mrs. Lambert, Vincent acknowledged. An unexpected pleasure. Eleanor snorted. Save the pleasantries. I'm told you've frozen our foundation, threatened my grandchildren with financial ruin, and turned my granddaughter's affair into a public spectacle. Normally, I would have my lawyers bury you. She paused, studying him. But I've always believed in understanding one's adversaries directly. A philosophy I share, Vincent replied. Then understand this. The Lambert legacy spans 5 generations. It has weathered wars, depressions, and scandals that would destroy lesser families. Whatever grievance you have with Diana or her parents, the foundation serves thousands through its charitable works. Are you prepared to damage that legacy for revenge? Vincent considered his response carefully. Eleanor Lambert was not someone to underestimate. With respect, Mrs. Lambert, I'm not the one who put the foundation at risk. The irregularities I discovered in the offshore accounts, the commingling of personal expenses with charitable funds, the undisclosed transfers, those existed before I found them. Eleanor's expression didn't change, but Vincent noticed her fingers tighten slightly on her cane. What exactly did you find? Instead of answering directly, Vincent turned his laptop toward her. On screen was a folder labeled Foundation Audit. This contains everything. The creative accounting began 3 years ago, primarily through accounts managed by Howard and Vivian. Diana either didn't notice or chose not to question it. Eleanor reviewed the documents silently, her face growing more severe with each page. After 10 minutes, she closed the laptop with a decisive movement. How many people know about this? Currently? Just me, my legal team, and now you. Eleanor nodded slowly. And your demands? I understand there's a separation agreement. Complete severing of ties between myself and the Lambert family. Return of certain personal assets. Non-interference clauses. All quite standard for a situation like this. There's no standard for a situation like this, Mr. Harlow, Eleanor said dryly. But your terms are more reasonable than I expected. She tapped her cane thoughtfully. What about Diana? Diana receives what she brought into the marriage, minus funds used in planning against me. The house remains mine, as per the deed she signed. No alimony, no ongoing financial entanglements. And you believe she'll accept this? Vincent's expression hardened. She has approximately 8 hours to decide. After that, the irregularities I discovered become matters of public record. Eleanor studied him with new intensity. You're not bluffing. No. May I ask a personal question, Mr. Harlow? Vincent inclined his head in permission. Did you ever love my granddaughter? The question caught him off guard. He considered deflecting, but found himself answering honestly. Yes, deeply, for many years. And now? Now I see her clearly. Eleanor nodded, seeming to find something satisfactory in his answer. She rose to her feet with surprising grace for her age. I'll need copies of those files. Vincent raised an eyebrow. May I ask why? Because, Mr. Harlow, while you've been planning your revenge, you've overlooked something important. The foundation isn't just Diana's concern or Howard's pet project. It's my life's work. Her voice took on a harder edge. And I do not appreciate discovering that my son and his wife have been using it as their personal piggy bank. Vincent felt a shift in the dynamic between them. You didn't know? No, Eleanor admitted. I've been semi-retired for 5 years, serving as chairman emeritus, but leaving daily operations to the next generation. Clearly, that was a mistake. She extended her hand. "The files, please." Vincent transferred copies to a secure drive and handed it to her. "What will you do?" "My family will sign your separation agreement," Eleanor said decisively. "Every one of them, including Diana. You'll release the foundation funds back to proper control. My control, not Howard's or Vivian's. Any irregularities you discovered will be corrected internally, without public disclosure." "And why would I agree to that modification?" Eleanor's smile was thin. "Because, Mr. Harlow, I can offer you something more valuable than public vindication. I can offer you the truth about your marriage, a truth even you haven't discovered yet." Vincent felt a chill of premonition. "What truth?" "Sign these revised terms first," Eleanor said, producing a document from her handbag. "Then we'll talk." Vincent reviewed the modifications. Minor adjustments to the foundation oversight provisions, a clause establishing Eleanor as interim director during restructuring, and a confidentiality agreement covering the financial irregularities. The core of his demands remained intact. He signed. Eleanor took the document and nodded with satisfaction. A wise decision. She moved toward the door, then paused. "Come to the main house at 7 p.m. The family will be assembled. Bring your files, all of them. After the signing, we'll have our private conversation. And if I find your truth insufficient..." Eleanor's eyes were suddenly cold. "Mr. Harlow, in my 82 years, I have never failed to deliver on a promise. The truth I offer will change how you see everything that's happened, including your own role in it." After she left, Vincent sat motionless, replaying their conversation. Eleanor Lambert was everything Diana had described years ago: formidable, shrewd, and utterly in command. But what truth could she possibly reveal that he hadn't already uncovered in his months of investigation? At his computer, Vincent made a final review of his evidence files. Each Lambert family member had their own folder containing specific evidence of their involvement in the conspiracy against him. Diana's was the largest, Vivian's a close second. Howard's contained primarily financial documents. Paul's was nearly empty, confirming his limited involvement. Vincent had been meticulous, leaving nothing to chance. Yet Eleanor's confidence suggested he had missed something crucial. At precisely 7 p.m., Vincent entered the main house for the first time since his initial confrontation with the family. He carried a secure briefcase containing backup drives of all his evidence. The great room had been transformed into something resembling a corporate boardroom, with the Lambert family seated around a long table. Eleanor sat at the head, Diana to her right, Howard and Vivian to her left. The atmosphere was funereal as Vincent took his designated seat at the opposite end of the table. Before him lay multiple copies of his separation agreement, modified as per his arrangement with Eleanor. "We are gathered to resolve the unfortunate situation that has developed," Eleanor began, her voice commanding instant attention. "Each person at this table will sign the agreement before them. There will be no discussion, no negotiation, and no dramatics. Is that clear?" The family murmured their assent, though Vivian looked ready to object until silenced by Eleanor's pointed stare. "Vincent has agreed that upon execution of these documents, all financial controls will be returned to the Foundation under my direct oversight. All evidence of certain irregularities will remain confidential, provided the terms of this agreement are strictly observed going forward." One by one, the Lamberts signed the documents passing around the table. Diana's hand trembled slightly as she added her signature, her eyes never meeting Vincent's. Nolan, seated at the far corner, signed last, his expression a mixture of resentment and relief. "It is done," Eleanor announced when the last copy reached her. She handed the stack to one of her assistants, who promptly left the room. "Now, I must ask everyone except Vincent and Diana to leave us. What follows is a private family matter." Vivian began to protest, but Howard gripped her arm, shaking his head slightly. The room emptied until only Vincent, Diana, and Eleanor remained. "Grandmother, I don't understand," Diana said, her voice uncharacteristically uncertain. "No, you don't," Eleanor agreed. "Neither of you do. But it's time you did." She opened a slender folder she'd kept beside her throughout the meeting. Vincent, in your investigation of my family's conspiracy against you, did you ever wonder why they were so determined to see your marriage end? I assumed they never accepted me, Vincent replied. I wasn't from their world. A reasonable assumption, but incomplete. Eleanor removed a document from the folder. This is a genetic test conducted 15 years ago, shortly before you and Diana became engaged. Diana gasped. Grandma, no. Silence, Eleanor commanded. This deception has gone on long enough. She slid the document toward Vincent. My son Howard was adopted as an infant, a fact known only within the family. His birth parents were ordinary people, a factory worker and a waitress. When Howard and his wife had Diana, they raised her as a Lambert in every way, including the family's obsession with bloodlines and heritage. Vincent scanned the document, beginning to understand where this was headed. When Diana became serious about marrying you, Eleanor continued, Howard insisted on a background check, standard practice for Lambert in-laws. That investigation revealed something unexpected. She paused, meeting Vincent's eyes directly. Your father, Richard Harlow, was Howard's biological half-brother. The revelation landed like a physical blow. Vincent stared at Eleanor, then at Diana, who had buried her face in her hands. You're saying Diana and I are first cousins once removed? Eleanor confirmed. Not close enough for legal prohibition in most states, but close enough to violate the Lambert obsession with genetic distance in marriage. Close enough that Howard and Vivian were horrified. They knew, Vincent whispered. All this time they knew. Yes, they opposed the marriage privately, but feared the scandal of revealing why. When you persisted, they reluctantly agreed, believing the marriage would eventually fail naturally. But it didn't, Diana said, finally looking up. Her face was streaked with tears. We were happy, Vincent. For years, we were happy. Until Nolan returned, Vincent said, the pieces falling into place. And your parents saw an opportunity to correct what they viewed as a mistake. Eleanor nodded. They encouraged the reconnection, facilitated meetings, created opportunities. Not just because they preferred Nolan's pedigree, but because they truly believed ending your marriage was correcting a wrong. Vincent sat back, absorbing the implications. Did you know Diana? About our connection? Diana shook her head, her eyes pleading. Not until after we were married. Mother told me during an argument 2 years in. She said explained why we couldn't. She faltered. Couldn't have children, Vincent finished for her. The years of fertility treatments, the disappointments, the eventual decision to stop trying, all cast in a new and disturbing light. I wanted to tell you, Diana whispered, but I was afraid you'd leave. And then as time passed, it seemed impossible to explain why I'd kept it secret. Eleanor closed her folder. I've stayed out of my family's affairs too long, allowing Howard and Vivian's obsessions to poison everything they touch. That ends today. She fixed Diana with a stern gaze. Your behavior has been inexcusable, regardless of your parents' manipulation. You betrayed a good man. Diana lowered her eyes, unable to argue. Eleanor turned to Vincent. And you, Mr. Harlow, have orchestrated a masterful revenge. One that, I must admit, my family deserved. She rose from her seat. I'll leave you two now. What happens next is entirely your decision. After Eleanor departed, Vincent and Diana sat in silence, the weight of revelation settling between them. Did you ever love me? Vincent finally asked, echoing Eleanor's earlier question to him. Or was I always just a rebellion against your family? Diana looked at him, her facade completely gone. I loved you more than I've ever loved anyone. That wasn't a lie. Vincent nodded slowly. And Nolan? An escape, she admitted. From guilt. From a secret. From watching you build houses for children we'd never have. Her voice broke. From looking into your eyes every day, knowing my family saw our marriage as something shameful. Vincent gathered his files and stood. The anger that had fueled him for months felt different now. Not gone, but transformed. I'm leaving tomorrow. The house is yours until the divorce is finalized. Vincent, Diana called as he reached the door. What will you do about the foundation irregularities? Now that you know everything. He paused, considering. I'll honor my agreement with Eleanor. The evidence stays private as long as the terms are kept. He turned to face his wife one last time. Some family secrets should remain buried. As Vincent walked away, he realized the true architecture of his revenge had just revealed itself. Not in the public humiliation of the Lamberts, not in the financial leverage he'd engineered, but in this moment, choosing to walk away with his dignity intact, leaving them to face the wreckage of their deceptions alone. It wasn't forgiveness. Vincent Harlow did not forgive betrayal, but it was something else, something that would allow him to rebuild without the weight of hatred. Or so he thought. Chapter 7. The Empty Frame. 6 months after the Lambert family reunion, Vincent Harlow sat in his downtown penthouse office, reviewing plans for a new sustainable housing development. The divorce had been finalized 3 months earlier with surprising efficiency. Diana had not contested any of his terms. The Lambert family had honored their agreement, maintaining their distance from both his personal and professional life. Vincent had thrown himself into work, expanding his firm internationally and focusing on projects with social impact. Outwardly, he appeared to have moved on completely. Those who knew him before noted a new hardness beneath his professional demeanor, but attributed it to the natural aftermath of a difficult divorce. Only Vincent knew that beneath his composed exterior, a final phase of his plan was unfolding, one that Eleanor Lambert's revelations had not deterred but rather refined. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Mira Vega entered, closing the door carefully behind her. It's confirmed, she said without preamble. The Lambert Foundation fundraising gala is scheduled for next Friday at the Metropolitan. All primary targets will be in attendance. Vincent nodded. And our access? Secured. The new security company they hired after firing their previous team is actually a subsidiary of ours, operating under a different name. The staff has been infiltrated as planned. The digital assets, ready for deployment. Once activated, the presentation will override their planned program. There's no way to stop once it begins. Vincent studied the architectural renderings on his desk, not of buildings, but of destruction. A different kind of blueprint. And there's no way to trace it back to us. Mira shook her head. The system is designed to self-destruct after execution. All paths lead to internal Lambert servers. They'll suspect, of course, but they can't prove anything. Good, Vincent said. Proceed as planned. After Mira left, Vincent moved to the window overlooking the city. The conversation with Eleanor had changed his understanding of the conspiracy against him, but not his determination to see justice done. The Lamberts had manipulated his entire marriage, treated him as genetically tainted, conspired to remove him, all while smiling at his dinner table. The agreement he'd signed protected them from exposure of the financial irregularities he'd discovered, but it said nothing about their other secrets. Vincent opened his private safe and removed a small object wrapped in velvet cloth. Unwrapping it revealed a sterling silver picture frame, elegant but empty. No photograph, just vacant space behind the glass. He'd commissioned it specially, an exact replica of the frames the Lamberts used for their family portraits. He traced its edge thoughtfully. 1 week until the gala. 1 week until the Lamberts understood that some debts could never be paid in full. On the night of the gala, Vincent did not attend in person. Instead, he watched remotely from a hotel suite across town, surrounded by monitors showing various angles of the Metropolitan's Grand Ballroom. The Lambert Foundation's annual fundraiser was their most prestigious event, attended by New York's elite and covered by Society Press. This year's theme was Legacy and Future, a celebration of the Foundation's history under the renewed leadership of Eleanor Lambert. Vincent observed the arrivals with clinical detachment. Howard and Vivian Lambert, looking slightly diminished from their positions of influence. Various cousins and extended family, still wealthy, but more cautious after the financial restructuring Eleanor had imposed. Nolan Blackwell, now officially engaged to Diana after a suspiciously brief courtship following her divorce. And finally, Diana herself, resplendent in a gown that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her smile practiced as she greeted donors and posed for photographs. To anyone else, She appeared the perfect philanthropic heiress. To Vincent, who knew every micro-expression of her face, she looked haunted. All systems ready, came Myra's voice through his earpiece. She was on site, disguised as catering staff. Program begins in 15 minutes. Vincent checked his watch. Proceed. The gala's formal program began with Eleanor Lambert taking the stage to welcome guests. At 82, she remained commanding, her voice strong as she spoke of the Foundation's renewed commitment to transparency and impact. Tonight is about honoring our past while embracing our future, Eleanor said, unaware that her carefully planned speech was about to be derailed. The Lambert legacy continues through our work in communities across. The lights dimmed unexpectedly. The large screens flanking the stage, intended to show a promotional video about the Foundation's accomplishments, flickered and went dark momentarily. When they illuminated again, they displayed something entirely different. A series of family photographs began to appear, cycling slowly across the screens. Innocuous at first, Lambert family gatherings, charity events, vacation photos, images that have been collected from various sources, including social media accounts and private servers. Then the tone shifted. The photos began to include text overlays, excerpts from private emails, text messages, and recorded conversations. The conspiracy against Vincent unfolded in public view, each family member's role detailed with damning specificity. The audience murmured in confusion, then shock, as the presentation continued. Howard Lambert instructing Nolan on how to reconnect with Diana. Vivian Lambert discussing the genetic situation with a family doctor. Diana arranging Vincent's business trips to coincide with her meetings with Nolan. The Lambert family on stage froze in horror as their private manipulations played out before New York's elite. Security personnel scrambled to shut down the system, but found themselves locked out. Then came the final section, documentation of the Lambert Foundation's financial irregularities. Not the offshore accounts Vincent had promised to keep secret, but other improprieties he'd discovered during his investigation. Personal expenses disguised as charitable outlays. Tax anomalies. Conflicts of interest. Nothing overtly illegal, but deeply embarrassing and potentially damaging to the Foundation's reputation. The screens went dark momentarily, then showed a single image, an empty silver picture frame. Below it, a simple message, the true Lambert legacy. In his hotel suite, Vincent watched Eleanor Lambert's face as she realized what had happened and who was responsible. Despite her age, she moved with remarkable speed, taking command of the situation, ordering the room cleared of press, instructing staff to collect phones from guests. But it was too late. The damage was done. In the age of smartphones and social media, containment was impossible. Already, Vincent could see guests surreptitiously recording, texting, posting. The Lambert reputation, built over generations and fiercely protected, was collapsing in real time. Vincent closed his laptop and poured himself a measure of whiskey. The execution had been flawless. No technical glitches, no premature exposure, no traceable connection to him. And he had kept his promise to Eleanor, technically. The specific offshore account irregularities remained confidential. He had simply exposed everything else. His phone rang, a private number few people possessed. Vincent answered, already knowing who it would be. "You broke our agreement," Eleanor Lambert said, her voice tight with controlled fury. "I honored every word," Vincent replied calmly. "Review the document." I agreed not to disclose the specific financial irregularities we discussed. I made no promises about other discoveries or about the family's personal conduct. A long silence followed. "I underestimated you, Mr. Harlow. A common mistake in your family. This vindictiveness doesn't suit the man I met 6 months ago. The man who seemed ready to walk away with dignity." Vincent's voice hardened. "That man learned something important after your revelation, Mrs. Lambert. He learned that your family didn't just conspire against him out of snobbery or social climbing. They conspired because they believed he was genetically inferior, tainted by connection to the very bloodline they protected so fiercely." Another silence, then. "What do you want now? More money?" control of the foundation. I want nothing from you. Not anymore. Tonight wasn't about leverage or negotiation. It was about truth. The truth your family tried to bury for generations. That your precious legacy is built on hypocrisy and manipulation. Eleanor's voice, when she finally spoke again, contained something Vincent had never heard before: defeat. I hope this brings you peace, Vincent. Somehow, I doubt it will. After she hung up, Vincent stood motionless, the triumph he'd anticipated feeling strangely hollow. He moved to the window and gazed out at the city lights, wondering if Eleanor was right. Would this final act of revenge bring closure, or merely extend the architecture of destruction to include himself? His reflection stared back at him from the window glass, harder, colder than the man who had once designed homes for a family he would never have. The man who had loved Diana despite everything. Vincent touched his reflection, tracing the outlines of the stranger he had become. Then he turned away, removing the empty silver frame from his briefcase and placing it on the desk. A reminder of what had been lost and what had been gained. The empty frame, the final blueprint. The Architect's Revenge. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. 3 days after the Lambert Foundation Gala, the fallout had exceeded even Vincent's carefully calculated expectations. Society pages and financial news outlets ran exposés on the family's internal manipulations and questionable foundation practices. Donors publicly distanced themselves. Board members resigned. The family's carefully curated image of philanthropic nobility lay in ruins. Vincent monitored it all from his office, where he had returned to work as if nothing unusual had occurred. He took no outward pleasure in the Lamberts' downfall, maintaining the appearance of a man focused solely on his expanding architectural empire. But privately, he recorded every development, adding each article and social media reaction to a digital archive, a museum of consequences that only he would ever visit. On the 4th day, Paul Lambert appeared unannounced at Vincent's office. His former brother-in-law looked haggard, the strain of recent events evident in his face. "You shouldn't be here," Vincent said, not offering a seat. "The non-interference agreement is the least of my concerns right now," Paul interrupted. "Eleanor Lambert died last night." Vincent felt an unexpected jolt. "What happened?" "Stroke. The doctors say the stress of the past few days accelerated her decline." Paul's expression was a mixture of grief and accusation. "Her last coherent words were about you." Vincent moved to the window, processing this unplanned consequence. Eleanor Lambert had been a formidable opponent, but not his target for destruction. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Are you?" Paul asked. "Because from where I'm standing, this looks like exactly what you wanted. The complete dismantling of the Lambert family." Vincent turned to face him. "Eleanor made her choices, as did all of you. She could have exposed the conspiracy years ago. Instead, she allowed it to continue until it threatened her legacy. She was 82 years old, Vincent. Whatever you think of the rest of us, she didn't deserve this end." Vincent felt a flicker of something uncomfortably like remorse, quickly suppressed. "Why are you really here, Paul?" "To make me feel guilty." Paul sighed heavily. "I honestly don't know. Maybe to understand. The Vincent I knew, the man I considered a friend, wouldn't have gone this far. The Vincent you knew discovered that his entire marriage was built on a foundation of lies. That his wife's family considered him genetically tainted. That his brother-in-law knew and said nothing. I told you about the affair," Paul protested, "but not about why my in-laws were so determined to end my marriage. Not about my biological connection to Howard. Not about the years of manipulation." Vincent's voice remained calm, but his eyes were cold. "You let me believe it was simple elitism, not eugenics." Paul looked away, unable to deny the accusation. "What happens now? With Eleanor gone, Howard takes control of the family interests again. He's already talking about retaliation. Against me?" Vincent raised an eyebrow. "I suggest he consult his lawyers first. I still have evidence I didn't release. This won't end, will it? The damage will just keep spreading." Vincent returned to his desk, a clear dismissal. "You made your choice years ago, Paul. You chose your blood family over truth. Now live with the consequences, as I have lived with mine." After Paul left, Vincent sat motionless, Eleanor's death casting an unexpected shadow over his victory. He had planned for every contingency except this. The death of the one Lambert he had developed a grudging respect for. That evening, Vincent received a message from Diana. "I need to see you. One last time." He almost ignored it. Their divorce was final, their lives separated. But curiosity, and something else he refused to name, made him agree to meet at a neutral location, a quiet bar in Tribeca known for its privacy. Diana arrived, looking nothing like the polished socialite from the gala. Her face was bare of makeup, her clothing simple, her eyes shadowed by grief. She slid into the booth across from Vincent without greeting. "Grandmother's funeral is on Sunday," she said after ordering a whiskey. "The family is in chaos. Father is drinking again. Mother hasn't left her room in 2 days. I didn't intend for Eleanor to die," Vincent said, surprising himself with the admission. Diana studied him. "But you intended everything else." "Yes." "Why? After the divorce, after the separation agreement. Why wasn't that enough?" Vincent considered his answer carefully. "There are betrayals that change who you are at a fundamental level. Your family didn't just end our marriage, Diana. They made a mockery of 15 years of my life. They decided my genetic connection to Howard made me unworthy, while presenting themselves as paragons of moral authority. And now you've destroyed that authority completely." Diana's voice was hollow. "Congratulations. Don't pretend you were an innocent bystander," Vincent said, his tone hardening. "You knew about our connection for 13 years and said nothing. You let me believe our fertility issues were bad luck or biology, not your deliberate choice based on genetic fears. You orchestrated my business travel to facilitate your affair." Diana flinched but didn't deny it. "I've lost everything, Vincent. Is that enough for you?" "You haven't lost everything. You still have Nolan, your trust fund, your family name, tarnished but intact." "Nolan left yesterday," Diana said quietly, "when a foundation scandal threatened his own business interests. It turns out his devotion had practical limits." Vincent felt no satisfaction at this news, only a distant acknowledgement of its inevitability. "I'm sorry. Are you?" Diana laughed bitterly. "This is exactly what you planned." "No," Vincent corrected. "I plan to expose the truth. The consequences are the natural result of your family's actions, not my design." They sat in silence, the weight of their shared history filling the space between them. Finally, Diana spoke again, her voice softer. "Do you remember the house you designed for us in the early years? The one with the nursery overlooking the garden?" Vincent nodded. It had been his most personal project, a home designed specifically for the family they planned to have. They had sold it after 5 years of failing to conceive, the empty nursery a constant reminder of what they couldn't achieve. "I went back there last week," Diana continued. "The new owners let me see it. They've turned the nursery into a home office. All traces of our dreams gone." She looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "That's what you've done to my family, Vincent. You've erased our legacy, turned it into something unrecognizable." "Your family did that themselves," Vincent replied, unmoved. "I simply held up a mirror." Diana studied him, really seeing him perhaps for the first time since their separation. "You've changed. There's nothing left of the man I married. That man died the day he discovered his marriage was a sham." Diana finished her drink and stood. "Goodbye, Vincent. I won't contact you again." She paused before leaving, reaching into her purse to withdraw a small object wrapped in tissue paper. She placed it on the table without explanation and walked away. After she was gone, Vincent unwrapped the package. Inside was a silver cufflink with a distinctive blue stone, the match to the one he'd found under their bed all those months ago. With it was a note in Diana's handwriting. "Some patterns can't be broken. Some architecture can't be redesigned." Vincent stared at the cufflink, understanding the message. Diana was acknowledging the symmetry of their destruction, how they had broken each other in ways that could never be repaired. That night, in his penthouse, Vincent opened his private safe and took out the empty silver frame. He placed the cufflink inside, behind the glass, a small, glittering artifact of everything he had lost and everything he had destroyed. a memorial to victory, a monument to emptiness. The architect's final design. Chapter 9. The Legacy. 1 year to the day after the Lambert Foundation Gala, Vincent Harlow stood on the observation deck of his newest project, a striking mixed-use tower that architectural critics were already hailing as revolutionary. From this height, the city sprawled before him, a testament to human ambition and design. His professional success had reached unprecedented levels in the past year. The publicity surrounding his divorce and the subsequent Lambert scandal had paradoxically enhanced his reputation. The brilliant architect who had survived a conspiracy by one of the city's most powerful families. New clients sought him out, fascinated by both his designs and his mythology. Vincent had leveraged this interest strategically, focusing his firm on sustainable development projects that would outlast scandal and gossip. His name would be attached to structures that improve communities, not just adorn skylines. It was a legacy built on creation rather than destruction. Yet despite his professional triumphs, Vincent lived a deliberately solitary existence. He maintained no social media presence. He declined interviews about his personal life. He attended industry functions only when absolutely necessary, arriving late and leaving early, avoiding the inevitable questions about the Lamberts. The few who worked closely with him noted how he had changed, still brilliant, still demanding excellence, but with a coldness that hadn't existed before. The architect had rebuilt himself as meticulously as he designed his buildings, eliminating vulnerabilities, reinforcing boundaries. Today, however, was different. Today, Vincent had agreed to the one meeting he had been avoiding for months. "Impressive view," came a voice behind him. Howard Lambert emerged from the elevator, looking older than his 65 years. The scandal had accelerated his aging, deepening the lines in his face, whitening his hair almost completely. "Thank you for meeting me," Howard said when Vincent didn't immediately respond. Vincent nodded, maintaining his position at the glass wall. "Your message said it was important." "It is." Howard moved to stand beside him, gazing out at the city. "The Lambert Foundation is being dissolved. After Eleanor's death and the revelations, the board voted for complete disbandment. The remaining assets will be distributed among other charitable organizations." Vincent absorbed this information without visible reaction. A practical solution. Yes. Howard seemed to gather himself before continuing. "I'm dying, Vincent. Pancreatic cancer. 6 months, maybe less." This did elicit a response. Vincent turned to study his former father-in-law, the man who had orchestrated much of the conspiracy against him, the man who shared his blood through a connection neither had known about until it was too late. "I'm sorry to hear that," Vincent said finally, and meant it. Death had a way of putting even the most elaborate revenge into perspective. "Before I go, I needed to tell you something. Something even Eleanor didn't know." Howard's hands trembled slightly as he gripped the railing. "The genetic test, the one that showed our biological connection, it was wrong." Vincent went very still. "What are you saying?" "After you and Diana became engaged, I had the test done privately. The results showed we shared a paternal bloodline. I was disturbed. The Lamberts have always been obsessed with genetic distance in marriage. It's an old family neurosis dating back generations." Howard took a labored breath before continuing. "I told Vivian and a few others. We agreed Diana couldn't know. She was too much in love with you to be rational. We thought the marriage would naturally fail given the pressures of your career and Diana's social obligations. But it didn't," Vincent said, his voice dangerously quiet. "No, you were surprisingly compatible. When Diana confided in us about your fertility issues years later, I saw an opportunity. I suggested more tests. Vivian told Diana about our supposed connection, implying it explained your conception difficulties." Vincent's hands clenched. "You manipulated your own daughter into believing she couldn't safely have children with her husband?" Howard didn't flinch from the accusation. "Yes, it's the worst thing I've ever done. And the test was wrong. I had another done 3 months ago, after a confrontation with Diana following the foundation scandal. She demanded the truth about everything. This test was more comprehensive, using newer technology. Howard reached into his jacket and removed a document. We aren't related, Vincent. Different genetic markers entirely. The original test had a sampling error. Vincent took the paper, scanning the technical details with growing comprehension. All those years of believing they couldn't have children for genetic reasons. A complete fabrication based on a flawed test and a family's obsession with bloodlines. Does Diana know? He asked finally. Yes. I told her when I received the results. Howard's voice broke slightly. She hasn't spoken to me since. Vincent folded the document carefully, his mind calculating the implications of this final revelation. Why tell me now? What purpose does this serve except to compound the damage? Howard looked suddenly older, more fragile. Because I'm trying to set right what I can before I die. Not for forgiveness, I don't expect that, but for truth. Something my family should have valued more than appearances. They stood in silence, the city continuing its relentless pace below them, indifferent to their personal drama. What will you do with this information? Howard asked eventually. Vincent considered the question. The revelation changed nothing and everything. It couldn't restore 15 years of marriage built on lies. It couldn't undo the pain or the revenge he had exacted. But it did alter the foundation upon which he had rebuilt himself. Nothing, Vincent said finally. Diana has suffered enough, learning that we could have had the family she wanted but was deliberately prevented from having. It would only cause more pain. Howard nodded, seeming to have expected this answer. You're a better man than I ever gave you credit for. No, Vincent corrected. I'm exactly the man your actions created. He handed back the genetic test. Keep this. Destroy it. Diana never needs to know the full extent of your manipulation. Howard accepted the document with visible relief. Thank you. Don't mistake this for forgiveness, Vincent said, his voice cold again. Some architectures once destroyed can never be rebuilt. After Howard left, Vincent remained on the observation deck, watching as evening descended over the city. Lights flickered on in buildings across the skyline. Homes and offices filled with people connected by relationships, both genuine and false. His phone buzzed with a message from Mira. Lambert meeting confirmed. Instructions? Vincent stared at the text, thinking of the surveillance they still maintained on various Lambert family members, the network of information he had established during his revenge that he had never dismantled. With a few words, he could resume his campaign against them, armed with this new betrayal. Instead, he typed, terminate all monitoring. Delete archive data. Project concluded. Myra's response came immediately. Confirmed. Effective when? Vincent looked out at the city once more, at the buildings he had designed and the countless others he would create in the years ahead. His legacy would not be defined by revenge, but by what he chose to build from this moment forward. Effective immediately, he replied. That night, Vincent returned to his penthouse and opened the safe where he kept the silver frame containing Nolan's cufflink. He removed it, studying the artifact of his revenge, this empty frame that had come to symbolize the hollowness of his victory. With deliberate movements, he placed the genetic test results Howard had shown him into the frame, covering the cufflink. Then he sealed the back and hung it on his bedroom wall, not as a trophy but as a reminder that the truest revenge